Hey guys, tonight we step into a quiet world of candlelight and secrets where kingdoms are held not just by armies but by memory and ink. You're in a high tower tonight, the kind that creaks with wind and holds the smell of old vellum. A place where the air is warm only because the candle insists on burning. It's the end of a long day, and the flickering glow of wax is the only thing keeping the shadows at bay. You're seated at a long wooden desk, scarred by quills and time in a scriptorium that hasn't seen visitors in years. Your robes are soft with age, your hands still ink-stained from morning spent transcribing nonsense for nobles who think rhyming sun with one is the height of brilliance. But tonight is different. There's a sealed envelope before you. Blue wax. No crest. No courier's mark. Just a single loop of violet-stained ribbon curling around the edge like a sleeping snake. And the scent gods, the scent violet oil laced with something older. Something like parchment and longing. You turn it over once, twice. It's been here a while, tucked beneath a stack of irrelevant scrolls no one reads anymore. It wasn't meant to be found easily, and it wasn't meant for just anyone. Your fingers tremble a little, not from fear, but from memory as you break the seal. It cracks with the smallest sigh, like something exhaling after holding its breath for far too long. The parchment is cream-colored, smooth as moonlight, and curled slightly at the edges. And then you see it. That handwriting, you know it before you even register the letters. Her script always slanted to the left like it was trying to retreat from the page. The downstrokes heavy with ink, the loops precise, elegant, but not affected. Like everything she touched, it bore that impossible balance between discipline and wildness. You'd teased her once, said her letters looked like the footsteps of a fox in snow. She hadn't smiled, but her eyes had. You read the first line. This letter was never meant to be sent. Of course not. You set the letter down for a moment, the silence around you thickening as if the room itself is leaning in to listen. Somewhere in the rafters an owl stirs. You half expect the walls to whisper her name, because you are no longer alone in this room, not really. She is here. In the ink, in the folds, in the very air you breathe. The flame flutters, catching the edge of her script just so. It dances across the parchment like a lover retracing steps. Your throat tightens. The queen. Your queen. It's been years since anyone dared speak of her openly. A monarch both feared and mourned. The kind who rewrote edicts and sonnets with equal precision. She ruled with a spine of iron, but her softness, when shown, could undo even the sharpest minds. And she undid you, completely. You knew this day might come. The day you'd find something she left behind. But not like this. Not hidden in a dusty corner, not unsigned, not unread. And yet it begins again. The first line leads into a flood. The scent of violets now mingled with something else, dust, yes, but also longing. That quiet kind of sadness reserved for people who learn to speak in silences. You read on. If you are reading this, then time has done what I could not. It has brought us together again briefly, absurdly, without touch or voice. But I am with you nonetheless. You blink slowly, feeling every letter, as though it's being etched into your chest. She's writing to you. Not to a noble, not to a historian, not to a kingdom. Just you. The poet she once summoned to her garden for verses. The one she trusted with her secrets, though never with her tears. She must have written this after the fall, after her exile, or before her illness took its final form. Historians still argue whether her death was natural or arranged. But in this letter there is no mention of illness, only memory. You brush a speck of ash from the parchment and notice something odd. The bottom corner of the page bears a faint smudge, almost like a thumbprint. And in it, barely visible unless the candle hits just right, is the outline of a daisy. A doodle. Her doodle. She used to draw daisies on margins when she was anxious. You remember it vividly during one council session, just before announcing the execution of a traitor. She'd filled the entire parchment edge with tiny flowers, each petal pressed down with care. She didn't flinch when the executioner's axe fell, but she couldn't stop drawing those daisies. The past begins to stir in you like a familiar fever. Not painful, not pleasant. Just there. Like the ache behind your eyes when it rains. And as you read the next lines, I was never brave with you, only careful. And careful things do not survive history. You realize you've been holding your breath. The letter goes on winding gently like a stream through all the seasons you once shared. But that's for later. For now, you sit there alone, but not alone, gripping a page that trembles less than you do. And somewhere deep inside, you understand this isn't a letter of farewell. Not yet. This is a beginning. You sit back, letting the page fall gently against your chest, as if it needs to feel your heartbeat to continue. The candle beside you burns lower, and wax pools like melted pearls at its base. You adjust your seat on the creaky stool, its uneven leg forever tilting you slightly to the left, just as her letters did. It's absurd how even the furniture seems to remember her. You lift the parchment again and read on. Her voice in ink continues as if no time has passed. I remember the first poem you ever gave me, she writes. It wasn't even meant for me. You were reciting to a crowd barefoot with a lily stuck behind your ear like a bard, too poor to afford a laurel. You groan quietly. Oh, gods, that poem. You'd written it in a feverish burst of wine-soaked arrogance, thinking yourself the next Virgil. The crowd had clapped politely. She had not. She had stared, pierced, assessed, and then left. You assumed she hated it. She hadn't. I asked you afterward what the last line meant. The letter continues. You said it didn't matter, only the rhythm did. That was the moment I knew you were dangerous. You blink. Dangerous? You who once tripped over your own robe in front of the entire chamber because you tucked your quill behind your ear and forgotten it was still wet. But then again, yes. You remember the look she gave you that evening? Not love, not even interest, something stranger? Calculation softened by curiosity. She continues. There is a moment every ruler fears when the crowd listens to someone else more closely than to their queen. That night, I feared you, and then I hired you. You laugh out loud, a single huff of disbelief. A gust from the window sends a chill across the room as if history itself has shivered. You remember the day you were summoned to her court. You'd assumed it was punishment. Maybe you'd mocked a nobleman's receding hairline too publicly. Instead, you were led into the queen's private chambers, lavender-scented, sun-drenched, and filled with cats. 4 of them, each with their own velvet cushion. One of them tried to bite your sandal. She hadn't looked up from her embroidery when you entered. She simply said, "Write me something I haven't heard before." You had answered everything you've heard before was just badly written lies. There had been a long pause. Then she smiled. Historians still argue whether that smile was the start of your rise or the beginning of her fall. But either way it happened. And now, in her letter, she writes, "You were the only person I couldn't predict. That made you unbearable and necessary." A pause in the ink, as if she sat there pen suspended thinking of you. And you think of her not the queen, not the sovereign draped in brocade and suspicion, but the woman who once sat barefoot on a balcony at dawn drinking honey tea and reading banned poetry aloud to the pigeons. She had a laugh like a cracked bell. Not broken, just unusual. Something you had to listen to twice. She writes next of your voice. Your voice always carried, even when whispering. Even in silence, it haunted corners. I used to stand in the hallway after court hoping you'd be reciting under your breath. You smiled despite yourself. You'd assumed she never heard you, but of course she did. She heard everything. The Queen's letters were never edited, never redacted. But this one, it feels raw. No polish, no titles, just confession. You imagine her sitting alone, no crown on her head, just the weight of memory resting between her shoulder blades. Do you remember the peach garden behind the stables, she writes? You read me a poem there once under the broken arbor. I pretended not to cry. You do remember. It had rained the night before and the soil was soft beneath your boots. The arbor's vines were in bloom lavender blossoms tangled with wild grapes too bitter to eat. You'd written that poem in a rush ink, bleeding from one page to the next, and she'd accepted it like a sacrament. She never spoke afterward, just turned and walked away. You thought it hadn't meant anything. Apparently it meant enough to follow her into exile. You reach for the candle stub, nudging it slightly to coax a steadier glow. Shadows leap across the stone walls tall, twitching like gossiping ghosts. You aren't alone in this tower tonight. Her presence sits just behind your shoulder, and every time you exhale, the air feels heavier. And yet comforting. She writes, I never asked for poetry. I asked for truth. You gave me both, even when it made you enemies. Ah, yes, the enemies. You remember them well. Thick-necked dukes who thought rhyme was a sign of rebellion. Courtiers who whispered you were too clever by half. Which, to be fair, is exactly the right amount of cleverness to survive a royal court. You barely did survive. And now here you are. Years later. Reading the words of the woman who once ruled a nation and chose to spend stolen hours listening to your words instead of 1,000 other flatterers. She ends this section of the letter with a single sentence that folds time in half. Had I been born a farmer's daughter, I would have married you and died happy among goats. You laugh, not because it's funny, but because you can hear her voice in it. The sarcastic tilt, the deliberate absurdity, the yearning hidden behind humor. You fold the parchment gently, not to hide it, just to hold it closer. The next page waits. The next page is slightly heavier than the first, as though her thoughts grew thicker with every stroke. You run your fingertips along its edge, noticing a faint wrinkle near the center. A sign it had once been clenched in a fist or caught in the breath of something unspeakable. You begin reading again. This letter was never meant for delivery. But I wrote it anyway, hoping perhaps time itself might forget to erase us. A flicker of something rises in your chest grief, maybe. Or that peculiar ache that accompanies unspoken truths. She never did traffic in easy sentiment. Her love, if it ever was love, arrived. Wrapped in metaphor, tangled in law, and always about 5 minutes too late. She continues. I left this in the drawer beside my inkstones where I used to hide the apricots you brought me. The sweet ones. The ones too soft for royal platters. I always said they bruise too easily like poets. You sigh. You remember those apricots, one of your simpler gifts. You had no diamonds, no titles, no horses to name after her. But you had fruit plucked just after dawn warm, from the sun wrapped in your sleeve like contraband, and she had loved them. I told my steward I was allergic to them, she writes, just to keep them for myself. Even then the palace was crowded with watchers, eyes in every tapestry. I had to lie to be loved in peace. It was always that way with her. Intimacy lived in shadows, not in ballrooms or parades, but in dusty side corridors and fleeting glances across council tables. Even a shared apricot had to come with a half-dozen plausible alibis. You shift slightly careful not to disturb the fragile letter, and think of that tiny alcove behind the kitchens, the place you both called the Room of Warmth. A ridiculous name since it was mostly full of dry firewood and mice. But there, hidden between flour sacks and cracked tiles, you once recited a poem so quietly she had to lean in until her forehead touched yours just to hear. No kiss followed. Of course not. Just silence. And then a whisper. Write that again slower. The Queen continues in her letter. Even now as I write, the guards think I'm asleep. They do not know I am building you a paper cathedral one stained glass word at a time. You nearly dropped the parchment. A paper cathedral. Only she would call it that. Only she would wrap a goodbye in so many architectural metaphors. She had a thing for buildings. When the kingdom's coffers were flush, she'd commission spires instead of statues. Stone, she'd once said, doesn't beg for applause. It simply waits. Scholars still debate whether her passion for architecture was symbolic or just deeply inconvenient during war years. You smile at the memory of one councilman begging her to postpone the rose marble atrium plans until after the Northern Rebellion was quelled. She had nodded gravely, and then added a fountain. Fringe historians insist she was descended from a long line of masons who once built sun temples in the East. The official lineage, of course, denies this, but she often joked that she trusted stones more than nobles, and honestly, who could blame her? She shifts tones again. I have kept your last poem hidden behind a portrait. The one of me in the green gown. You hated that gown. You did. It was tight in strange places, overly embroidered and completely impractical. But it had been designed by a foreign artist whose loyalty she needed. So she wore it. And in doing so, she looked like someone else. She knew it too. That night you whispered, "If you want to vanish, this dress is perfect," and she just smirked and said, "Then watch me disappear." The poem you gave her that evening was sharp-edged, political, a little cruel. You thought she'd burn it. Instead, she hid it behind the canvas of a state portrait. Because of course she did. If they ever find it, she writes, let them think it's a lover's quarrel. They won't know it was prophecy. Another gust of wind rattles the shutter. You glance up at the narrow window. The moon has climbed higher now, casting a milk-pale glow across the desk. You could almost imagine her standing there, arms folded, judging your reaction from beyond time. And gods she would judge. She once told you your handwriting was florid, like someone trying to seduce a tree. You had responded that her signature looked like a dagger held by a drunk. She'd been delighted. The letter now shifts again. I miss the sound of your footsteps in the west corridor, the way they hesitated right outside my door. I never opened it. I always waited. Perhaps I thought you'd knock, but poets never knock, do they? They wait for doors to open themselves. You press your lips together. She's right. You never knocked. You waited for a sign, a breath, a whisper, and she gave you none. Maybe that's why you wrote, because writing let you barge in without ever opening a door. She finishes the page with a single line, uncharacteristically brief, I remember everything. Even the things I pretended to forget. You let that linger in the air. It hums between your ribs. It glows beneath your skin. The letter continues. But for now, you lower the page, close your eyes, and let her voice echo in the candlelight. You don't even try to fight the feeling anymore. Her voice is threaded into your breath now. Soft, but unrelenting. Like the last note of a song you forgot how to sing but never stopped humming. You unfold the next sheet. It's thinner than the last, almost translucent, and smells faintly of lavender. The kind of page used not for declarations but for secrets. Her handwriting here is slightly uneven, more hurried. As if this portion poured from her unfiltered. I wonder what became of the garden. That's the first line. No preamble, no poetry. Just that a single question hung between you like a coat on a nail. You know which one she means. The one tucked behind the chapel where the hedges grew wild on purpose and the air always smelled like mint and damp stone. Where court meetings couldn't reach and servants only went when they were in love or in trouble. It was where she first told you her real name. Not the regnal one, grand and gilded and impossible to whisper without choking on syllables, but her childhood name. The one no scroll dares to record. The one she once said sounded like a raindrop falling into a cup of wine. You promised never to say it aloud, and you never did. She writes, I went there once more after you left. The vines had overtaken the arbor and the bench was cracked. But there were still mulberries. A smile forms on your lips. She hated mulberries. Claimed they stained like guilt. But she always ate them anyway, spitting the pits onto her sleeve when she thought no one noticed. She continues. Do you remember the ink you made from those berries? You said it was good enough for lies, but not for love. You remember. It had been a dare, mostly. You'd been sulking about the quality of court parchment and concocted a purple-black ink from mashed fruit and vinegar. It bled terribly, smelled worse, and ruined 3 of her best handkerchiefs. She kept all 3. Historians still argue whether that particular dye experiment was symbolic part of the Queen's rumored obsession with subverting royal protocol or just the desperate act of a lovesick scribbler who had too much free time. Either way, the ink never faded. You blink down at the current letter. Her regular ink is black precise, but there along the left margin you notice something different. A single word circled in faded violet. It's your name, written in the same mulberry ink. How you touch it gently as if it might smudge even now. But it holds. Somehow she saved a vial after all those years. She writes, I thought of sending you my journals once. The ones I kept in cipher. But I imagined you rolling your eyes at all the metaphors and I lost my nerve. You would have rolled your eyes. And then devoured every page. She always claimed you were the only person who could read her, even when she was pretending not to say anything at all. In this part of the letter, her tone softens. She turns reflective, nostalgic even. The court always thought I hated poetry. Too sentimental, too slow. But I never hated poetry. I hated audiences. You laugh. Yes, that tracks. She would listen to you read aloud for hours, then the moment a second person entered the room, she'd yawn and declare it utterly exhausting. You once caught her pretending to nap mid-sonnet just to make a bishop leave. She was allergic to pretense, but addicted to mystery. The letter drifts into a memory now, one you'd almost forgotten. Do you remember the rain that night? Not the famous storm, the quiet one. The one where the leaks in the roof dripped into buckets and we played chess on the floor. You do. The palace roof had been under repair, of course delayed, because the architect had fallen in love with a wine cellar and refused to leave the capital. You and the queen had camped in the old nursery surrounded by books, pillows, and damp tapestries. You played chess. Badly. She cheated, obviously. And somewhere in the middle of a checkmate you never saw coming, she had asked you, would you die for me? You had said, that depends, would you die after me? She'd laughed, the cracked bell laugh, then kissed the bishop piece and knocked over your king. She writes, now I asked you that question not because I needed loyalty, but because I needed to know whether I frightened you. You pause feeling the ghost of that moment. She did frighten you, but not because of her power. She frightened you because she saw every part of you, even the parts you hadn't written yet. The queen was never content with reading the final draft. She wanted the scribbles, the margins, the unfinished thoughts. She wanted the chaos. You once told me I was the only person you knew who could lie with her eyes and tell the truth with her silence. She did that a lot. Like the time she refused to toast the ambassador's proposal but sent a single dried rose in response. Or the day she wore mourning white instead of black and claimed it was for fashion, not grief. The kingdom took a month to decode that one. She ends this page with, poets speak to time, not to people. But I wrote this for you. Not for posterity, not for a library shelf, for your hands, for your eyes, for your remembering. You fold the page slowly, cradling it like a fragile bird. Outside, the wind has died down. The candle is low now, just a trembling gold coin of light, and the memory of a queen lingers on the rim of your breath. The next page is thicker, less perfumed, less elegant. The ink is darker, as if the words were pressed harder into the fibers, as if she'd needed the act of writing to hurt just a little. You hold it gently careful, not to crease its corners, and begin again. I never told you what happened the day they poisoned my tea. Ah, that day. You inhale sharply the air thick with memory. It had been a midwinter. The court was weighed down with furs and fear. You remember the hush in the corridors, the way the torches burned lower, as if they too were afraid of what they saw. She had lifted the cup with her usual poise. Sipped once, twice, then stopped. You were watching from your usual place behind the pillar near the second column, pretending to read a book of translated epics. She had always let you stay there, said you added flavor to the air. She never made a sound, just set the cup down, dabbed her lips, and excused herself as if nothing had happened. I knew immediately, she writes, not from the taste, from the way the steward blinked when I reached for it. You remember that steward? Too polite, too polished. The kind of man who could iron suspicion into a smile. He vanished the next day. Or rather was vanished. I had a choice in that moment, she continues. Panic and prove my enemies right, or pretend I was immortal. Of course, she chose the latter. She always did. I waited exactly 23 minutes before collapsing in the privacy of my chamber, she writes. Long enough for the rumors to twist themselves into knots. I spent the evening vomiting into a gold basin and reading your poem about silence. You blink. She read your poem while dying. Well, that explains a lot. You remember that piece? It wasn't about her? Or at least you told yourself it wasn't. It was about the things people don't say. The silences between sentences. The way a hallway can hold a conversation even after it's empty. Apparently it was more literal than you thought. It kept me alive, she writes simply. You shake your head. She was always doing that, taking your metaphors and swallowing them like medicine. This section of the letter is less poetic, more raw. She doesn't bother with clever phrasing or elegant structure. It reads like someone writing while burning. After the poisoning, everything changed, she says. I stopped trusting the light. I only held meetings after sunset. I replaced 3 of my guards with women who had once robbed nobles in alleyways. I told them never to call me queen, only the tallest shadow. You smile despite the chill that creeps up your spine. The tallest shadow? She had a way of naming herself that no one else dared repeat. And yet behind closed doors, she was often smaller than people imagined. Not weaker, just more human. I kept you away for your safety, she writes next. That sounds noble. It wasn't. I was afraid you'd see the cracks. And worse, I was afraid you wouldn't. There it is. The reason you were exiled without warning? No crime, no scandal? Just a quiet dismissal under the guise of literary retreat. You'd been furious, heartbroken. You thought she'd grown tired of you. But it was fear. Not of you, but of what your presence might do to the illusion she was barely holding together. Historians still argue whether her late reign was brilliant strategy or slow unraveling. Whether her withdrawal from public ceremonies was mysticism or melancholy. But here in her own hand, the truth bleeds through. I began to write letters I never sent, she confesses. To you, to my brother, to the gods. I even wrote to the cat once. He never replied. You snort. That cat. The black one with a bent tail and imperial arrogance. He once scratched your boot because you dared sit in his sunbeam. She claimed he was reincarnated royalty. You said he was an entitled furball. She'd agreed. In this page, her humor resurfaces, sharp, dry, but soothing. She weaves memories in between the bitterness like honey layered between coughs. Do you remember the foreign prince who tried to woo me with an army of peacocks, she writes. I gave them all to the temple, except one. He lives in the West Garden now, still screams like a demon every sunrise. You remember, that peacock terrified the cooks for weeks. But beneath the jokes you sense the undertow of regret. I kept so many masks in that palace I forgot what my face looked like. She writes this without flourish, just a bare, exhausted truth. And it lands like a stone in your chest. The woman who once ruled a continent, who played nations like chess pieces and rewrote treaties in the margins of cookbooks, had been tired. And you hadn't known. You feel something hot in the corners of your eyes, and you tell yourself it's just the candle smoke. You read the last few lines of the page. If I could go back, I would drink the poison more slowly. I would savor it. Not because I wanted to die, but because I wanted to delay the moment you vanished from my life. The handwriting wavers there as though she paused. Perhaps to steady her hand, perhaps to weep. You'll never know. You lower the page again, staring at the flame. It wobbles in its pool of wax, casting strange shadows on the ceiling, shadows that move like dancers in mourning. And you, the reader, the poet, the exile, the almost lover, sit in silence and hold her poison-soaked truth like a relic. The wax is running low. The flame dances with more urgency now, as though aware that its time, like hers, is measured. You lean closer to the next page, its edge curled as if it had tried to protect its contents from being found. It begins simply, I should have died at sea. You blink. There is no flourish, no preamble. Just the brutal honesty of someone who stared down fate and laughed in its face. Or at least tried to. You keep reading. The storm was not in the prophecy. That's what unnerved the captain. Sailors believe in gods more than priests do. You hadn't heard this story in full. Only whispers. Rumors that her final voyage meant to be diplomatic or exilic, or perhaps both, nearly ended in disaster. A squall off the western coast, supplies lost, a ship nearly capsized. The Queen presumed drowned for 3 days. Now, in her own hand, she tells you the truth. The sea lifted us like a child lifts a toy briefly gleefully and then dropped us. I heard grown men sob like children. I was not afraid, only resentful. Resentful, of course. Only she would face death and feel inconvenienced. I had planned my death differently, she writes. Quiet, composed, perhaps in a room filled with your verses and soft cushions, not gulping salt water with the sailor's boot in my ribs. You wince at the image even as it makes you smile. She'd always had a flair for the dramatic, even in disdain. She recounts the night in vivid detail, now lightning that sliced the sky like a butcher's blade, the creaking of the mast, as it twisted in protest, the stench of bilge water mixing with fear. And over all of it, her calm. I recited your poem about bones and oceans, she writes, the one where the drowned still whisper. It kept me steady. The helmsman thought I was praying. You remember that piece? Barely. It was written in a week of sleeplessness after you heard a tale of shipwrecked monks. You never thought she'd even seen it. When the storm passed, she continues, I wrapped myself in a net and sat on deck until sunrise. The crew avoided me. They thought I had made a bargain. Historians still argue whether her survival at sea was luck or divine favor. Some claim she had a talisman sewn into her robes, an heirloom from her mother. Others say she simply bribed fate with sheer will. She admits neither. Instead, she writes, I realized then that I was not meant to die. Not yet. I had too many unfinished conversations with ghosts. Especially you. You feel your throat tighten again. It wasn't your imagination then. The way the wind had felt strange that week. The odd silence in the birds. You'd known something was wrong and you'd written a poem about it, a quiet one never published. Just left on your desk like a candle unlit. She shifts now, recalling a quiet moment on that ship. A sailor with one eye told me I reminded him of a siren. I asked if that was because I lured men to death. He said no, it was because I never looked back. That line sits with you. She never looked back. Not publicly. Not in speeches or proclamations. But this letter, this is her backward glance, her only one. You feel the weight of that truth settle on your shoulders like a velvet mantle. Then comes something unexpected. She begins to describe a dream. The second night after the storm, I dreamt of a palace made of books. No stone, no walls, just pages. They rustled in the wind like prayer flags. You close your eyes for a moment, imagining it. She continues. You were there, wearing ridiculous robes, reading aloud to ghosts. They laughed at the wrong lines. You smile. I wandered the halls but could never find the exit. Every door opened into another stanza. Every window showed a different memory. Some I didn't recognize. She pauses here and you imagine her sitting at a wooden desk, lit only by a porthole's glow, wrapped in a damp cloak, dripping seawater onto parchment. When I woke, she writes, I asked the cook for paper. He gave me fish wrap. I wrote a letter to the moon and threw it overboard. Of course she did. She ends the page with a single line unadorned but aching with intent. I thought you should know I lived, not survived. Lived. You fold the page, hands shaking slightly. The candle sputters again. One more flare, one more gasp of light. In the stillness of the scriptorium, with wind whispering through the cracked shutters and ink drying slowly in the air, you let that word echo inside you. She lived. And so, somehow, do you. The next page is narrower, cut unevenly along the right edge, as though she tore it from a larger sheet in haste. The ink here is slightly smudged in places, maybe from a trembling hand, maybe from tears. Though knowing her, probably the former. You draw a breath and read. I once tried to erase you. No hesitation, no build-up. You freeze. After your exile, I ordered every poem you'd ever written for the court to be removed from the archives. You grip the parchment more tightly than you mean to. Not destroyed, don't panic. Just misplaced. Like a favorite spoon hidden in the wrong drawer. You exhale equal parts annoyed and amused. That sounds exactly like her. Not vindictive, just complicated. I told myself it was necessary, she writes. A queen must have no ghost trailing her train. But you weren't a ghost. You were a shadow, and shadows cling. You remember, too, that season when your words vanished. Courtiers denied your authorship. Pages were rewritten. A nobleman tried to pass off your poem about olives and longing as his own. He changed olive to onion, which you never forgave. It had hurt more than you admitted. Not the censorship, but the silence from her. And now here it is. The truth laid bare. I tried to erase you, she repeats, and all I succeeded in doing was etching you deeper into the palace. A pause. The maids whispered your name when folding linens. The guards whistled your lines when bored. Even the kitchen boy carved one of your verses into a loaf of bread. A loaf, darling. You can't help it, you laugh. A loaf of bread. Your words crusted and golden smeared with butter and rebellion. It was a terrible line, she adds. I assume he chose it for the shape of the letters, not the meaning. Still, it made me cry. This is how she was. Simultaneously mocking and moved. A woman who ruled like a thunderstorm and wept at breadcrumbs. She shifts tone, now softer. I missed you. Most during the Festival of Bells. You blink. The festival. Always held at the end of winter, meant to shake off the cold with music and clamor. Bells tied to cloaks, doorways, horses, even soup ladles. The court would echo for days. You hated it. She loved it. That year I wore the bells myself, she writes. No ceremony. Just me in the snow barefoot and ringing like a fool. The image is absurd. And heartbreaking. You picture her stepping through frost-dusted courtyards in silence, the soft jingle of 1,000 tiny bells, speaking the words she wouldn't let herself say. Someone asked what I was doing, she adds. I told them I was chasing an echo. You don't realize you've set the page down until the chill of the room seeps back into your fingers. The wind outside groans low and long. The shutters shudder. But in here, everything is still. You read on. I kept your scarf. You blink again. The old scarf, the one you'd used to mop your ink spills, which she'd mockingly stolen after claiming it smelled like poorly repressed feelings. You thought she'd tossed it. Apparently not. I wore it when I needed courage, she writes. Not because it held your scent, though it did, but because it reminded me that someone somewhere once told me the truth and didn't expect anything in return. That was always the difference. You never wanted her throne, just her truth. And maybe her laughter. Do you remember the time I asked you to write a verse about lying? She continues. You wrote 28, all contradictory, all brilliant, you remember. She was furious and delighted, declared it an act of verbal treason, then had the pages stitched into the lining of her cloak. Historians still argue whether that cloak was ceremonial or cursed. Some believe the contradiction verses were spells. One scholar insists they were code for a hidden rebellion, but they were just poetry. Yours? Hers? Both. She ends the page with something that stops your breath, I thought. Forgetting you would save me. Instead, it hollowed me. There's no signature, just a single line smaller than the rest, almost an afterthought. I hope you kept something of mine. You look around the scriptorium. At the cracked desk, the long, cold hearth. The window seat where you once composed an ode to a sleeping squirrel. You've kept everything, even the silence. Especially the silence. You fold the page slower this time, and you remember the bells, the scarf, the echo, and how even after exile, even after erasure, her memory rang louder than any festival ever dared. You take the next page like it's fragile with age, though it's no older than the candle still sputtering beside you. The texture is different, linen paper expensive, used only for proclamations or confessions that require permanence. The ink has a slightly green tint, the kind she preferred when writing words she didn't want mistaken for diplomacy. You already know this page will cut deeper than the rest. It begins. You once told me that memory is a knife and some of us sleep with it under our pillow. You did say that, probably after too much spiced wine and not enough sleep pacing in her chambers like a ghost of yourself. She'd laughed at the line at the time, then promptly ordered her pillowcases changed. Said she refused to rest her head on metaphor, but clearly she remembered. I did sleep with it, she writes. The memory of you, of us. And I kept sharpening it in my mind over and over until it could no longer be held safely. You paused, letting the line settle. This is not the kind of letter one writes with the hope of being remembered kindly. It's the kind you write when you finally give up trying to be understood. She continues. There are so many things I should have said when I had the crown, the time in your eyes. A deep sigh escapes you before you can stop it. You know what's coming. Regret. The one monarch immune to control. I should have told you I envied you, she writes. You were free in ways I could only pretend to be. You could write about pain without being accused of causing it. Historians still argue whether her harshest decrees were hers alone, or forced by the iron weight of lineage and court tradition. But she knew. She knew the difference between power and liberty. I watched you leave the palace with only a bag of scrolls and your stupid sandals, she continues. I stayed with a throne carved from petrified wood and obligations older than our language. You remember that morning too clearly. The dismissal, the silence that followed it, no final look, no window curtain drawn, just a message from a steward and the echo of your own footfall. You'd been angry for years. Now reading her words, you feel something far worse than anger. Understanding. She writes, I lied when I said you were too dangerous to keep close. The truth was simpler. You made me want things I had no name for. Your fingers tremble slightly, not because of the confession, but because of how long you waited for it. She goes on, I wanted to be a garden, not a fortress. I wanted to be read, not studied. And most of all, I wanted to be able to sit beside you without weighing what that moment cost the kingdom. You reread that line twice. You picture her on that velvet throne posture, perfect, surrounded by diplomats and enemies who wore the same perfume. And you outside those walls waiting for a glance that never came. You used to say I wore crowns like they were helmets, she writes. That I braced for battle even at picnics. You did. She once showed up to a poetry reading in armor. Claimed it was for the acoustics. I was afraid, she admits now, that if I let my guard down, I'd fall into you and forget how to get back. You remember the feeling, the tension in every shared silence. The way her fingers lingered too long on a page when she handed back your drafts. The way she never said your name unless no one else was listening. I loved you, she writes. There, I said it. Too late, too clumsily, and too far from where you are. Your breath catches. It's not the declaration that surprises you. It's that it's finally here. Not implied, not cloaked in metaphor. Just laid down in ink, raw and real. I never gave you a title, she writes. Not lover, not friend, not even traitor. You were always too many things. I couldn't contain you. You sit with that for a long time. Because she's right. She called you nothing because you were everything. Poet, confessor, mirror, ghost. She continues. I knew the poets after you would try to imitate your voice. I let them. I even praised them. But none of them made me flinch the way you did. A pause. Then you wrote like you were bleeding and smiling at the same time. Do you still... You're not sure. You haven't written anything that wasn't hollow or safe in years. If you do, she writes, send it to the wind. I still listen even now. You lower the page, your throat aching. Outside, the wind has shifted. It whistles through the shutter like a breath drawn in sharply. You imagine her standing somewhere beyond time listening, and you hear holding her last confession like a psalm. You glance at the final line of the page. If I am ever reborn, I hope I'm born with less duty and more voice. You fold the parchment with reverence. This page has no jokes, no clever turns of phrase. It's the truth peeled back like bark from a tree. And it's beautiful. And it hurts. This page feels different before you even open it. It crackles faintly as you unfold it, as if reluctant to be read. There's a faint reddish tint to one corner, perhaps wax, perhaps wine, or perhaps the pigment of some rare ink she favored for emotional weight. You don't know yet, but you can feel it. This page carries weight like the hush before a storm. You begin. Do you remember the room of unsent gifts? A quiet laugh escapes you. Of course you do. It was her idea, naturally. A small chamber tucked behind the queen's dressing quarters, sealed by a false wall and disguised as a linen closet. The court believed it was where she stored furs. But in truth, it was filled with things never given, wrapped bundles, unfinished letters, music boxes that played tunes no one else heard. She had taken you there only once. You recall the smell lavender cedar and old parchment. And the silence. Not heavy, not somber, just expectant. Like the room itself was holding its breath. I kept everything I wanted to give you, but couldn't, she writes now. Some for politics, some for pride. Most because I didn't trust myself not to smile when I handed them to you. You pause. The queen's smiling was not forbidden per se, but it was a rare and calculated event. A smile from her could topple treaties or start revolts. She used it like others use swords. There's a wooden box near the back, she continues, tied with black ribbon. It holds a coin, a glove, and a lock of my hair. You frown. A coin. The coin, she writes, anticipating you, was the first you ever earned from the court. I took it from your pay before it reached you. I had it polished. I carried it for years. You shake your head slowly. You remember that missing coin. You thought the bursar stole it. Turns out it was love. In a velvet pouch. The glove is the one I wore the night of your exile, she writes. I gripped it so tightly in my fist that the stitching split. You'd watched her from a distance that night. She hadn't spoken, hadn't looked your way. You'd thought she was unmoved. Now you know the fabric told the truth, her face wouldn't. The lock of hair, she adds, is a cliché. But I cut it on the day I first realized you'd never return. You pause. You hadn't planned on returning. Not because you didn't want to, but because she never called. Now you learn she sent 100 letters never posted, 100 thoughts never voiced, 100 gifts never given. If you ever find that room again, she writes, "Open the third drawer of the left-hand chest." There's a note inside. It simply says, "Too late." You swallow hard, because yes, it was. And yet, not entirely. She's still speaking to you now, still leaving gifts, words instead of objects, truth instead of riddles. She shifts tone again, more playful this time. Do you remember when you gave me a locket filled with sand? Another laugh bubbles out of you. How could you forget? It was the most ridiculous thing you'd ever made. A tiny brass locket meant for portraits or pressed flowers, but instead filled with grains of sand from a beach you claimed was magic. You'd told her it whispered in the dark. She'd been half irritated, half enchanted. I never wore it, she confesses now, but I slept with it under my pillow every night for a month. The whispering was real. You blink. Wait. What? Was that a joke you'll never know? She continues. There were days when the palace was too loud, when courtiers bickered and emissaries lied and the gods refused to answer. On those days, I went to the room of unsent gifts and sat among the boxes and pretended the world was quieter. A breath leaves you, because you did the same with your letters, your poems. Your quiet curses whispered to the wind, hoping she might catch them. I kept one gift for myself, she writes. It was the first poem you ever tore up. I found it in the hearth. Still warm, half burned. You stare at the page. That poem. It had been impulsive, overwritten, soaked in too much metaphor and too little restraint. You'd burned it in a moment of embarrassment. You never knew she saw. I pieced it back together, she writes. Badly. But the lines I could read were enough. You shake your head in disbelief. She kept everything. Even the broken parts. Especially the broken parts. She ends this page with a line that lands like an unsent telegram. You were the only gift I never managed to give myself. There it is again, that ache. That sweet aching truth that lives in the space between what was and what might have been. You fold the page gently as if it were made of breath and memory. And you wonder if somewhere behind a panel of rotting linen and forgotten cedar, that room still exists waiting for you. Waiting for someone to open the black ribbon. You unfold the next sheet slowly, already sensing the shift in atmosphere. The earlier pages carried weight, yes, but they danced between sorrow and mischief. This one feels heavier still, like the hush before a verdict or the echo after an oath. There's no greeting on this page, just a single line at the top as if she'd started in the middle of a thought. I wasn't supposed to be queen. You pause, not because it surprises you, but because it's the first time she's ever said it outright. My sister was the heir, she writes. I was the spare. I was supposed to marry a general and raise diplomatic children who loved olives and poetry. You'd heard that once from a drunken historian in a tavern who claimed the royal lineage had twisted itself like a vine to reach her. But no one dared print it. Now she confirms it. And more. When the fever took her, she continues, they didn't tell me for 3 days. They were trying to decide whether I could be shaped. You can almost hear the venom in that word. Shaped. They never understood she was already something sharper than shaping would allow. The moment I put on the crown, I knew, she writes. I wasn't taking her place. I was swallowing it. That sounds more like her. You told me once that power changes the handwriting, she continues. That no one who writes with a crown on their head can do so without slanting to the right. You remember that observation. It had been a joke, half flippant, half serious, as you helped copy a speech for her coronation. You noticed how her letters stiffened the moment the crown's shadow fell across the page. I hated that you were right, she admits. So I started writing with my left hand. You smile, of course she did. Always challenging gravity, even when seated on a throne. She dives deeper now past the public image and into her internal maps. They taught me to sit still, to smile slowly, to speak in sentences with 3 meanings of 4 denials. But they never taught me how to be alone. You glance around your small scriptorium. The irony doesn't escape you. You've been alone for years. She had people, yes, advisors, guards, flatterers, but solitude of the soul. That's another kind of isolation, the kind that echoes even when you're laughing. You were the only person who didn't need something from me, she writes, and that terrified me. Another silence. Then I loved you not because you were good, but because you were honest. That word lands softly, not a compliment, not a condemnation, just a truth. You never knelt, she writes. Not even when I asked you to. You wince a little. That day, you'd refuse to read her victory poem on your knees. It had been a test, of course, one of her many. And instead of submitting, you'd read it stand in your voice, steady your hands trembling. She had smiled afterward, then banned you from court for a week. I hated that I respected you more than my generals, she confesses. They obeyed. You questioned. And questions are more dangerous than sores. Historians still argue whether her sudden shifts in policy the grain reforms. The public debates the pardoning of 3 rebel poets were the result of her own insights or whispered influence. They never considered that the quiet voice she feared most might have come from a poet who simply refused to kneel. Do you remember the glass map? Yes. A detailed floor plan of the palace etched into a massive pane and hung in her study. A marvel of artistry, it shimmered like frozen water. Every wing, every hallway, every secret passage laid bare except one. There's a hidden corridor behind the Western Archive, she writes. It's not on the map. I refuse to let them add it. You remember asking her why once. She'd said every ruler needs one place they can disappear. You'd thought it was metaphor. It wasn't. I went there after your exile, she writes. Lit a single candle and wrote a question on the wall. Who am I when no one is watching? You lean back feeling the weight of that. She was never just a monarch. She was a woman carrying the weight of every unseen decision, every midnight mercy, every unsent letter. And you were her mirror, the one person who saw the reflection she refused to cast in public. The truth, she continues. When I wasn't being queen, I wasn't sure I was anything at all. You close your eyes, because you felt that too. In different ways, in different places. But it's the same ache. She closes the page with a confession you never thought you'd hear. Sometimes I envied the fools. The ones who loved loudly and died early. The ones who never ruled anything but still got their names in poems. You smile, because she was in poems, yours, others. She just never let herself believe it. I was never supposed to be queen. She writes once more, echoing the opening. But if I had to wear the crown, I'm glad I wore it while you were still watching. You fold the page with careful hands, and for a moment, just one flickering moment, you see her, not as the queen, not as the myth, but as the woman in the hidden corridor, staring at a question on the wall, waiting for someone to answer. This page is oddly smooth, almost new. No folds, no smudges. You suspect it was one of the last she wrote. There's a sense of control here, her usual whimsy tucked away her letters, steadier, more restrained, as though this part had to be written slowly. With dignity, with the weight of finality pressing into every line. She begins with a memory. You once asked me what it feels like to wear a mask for too long. You did. It had been after a long day of ceremonial nonsense. She had worn 5 different outfits in 6 hours, posed for 6 painters, and given 7 contradictory speeches to 7 foreign diplomats. She'd looked exhausted, her eyes like 2 bruises behind gold-trimmed veils. You'd said, "Isn't your face tired from pretending?" And she'd asked you, "Isn't yours tired from watching?" She never answered your question. Until now. It starts as a game, she writes. The crown makes you clever. You wear what they want. You speak as expected. You become a perfect echo of their hopes. A beat. Then slowly it becomes a second skin. And eventually you forget what it feels like to be anything but echo. You sit back staring at the words. The queen who once claimed, "I shape history like clay," now admits that history had shaped her right back. Maybe too well. I grew addicted to approval, she confesses, even from people I despised. I needed their nods, their bowed heads, their false laughter. I thought I was steering the ship, but often I was just painting the sails. You swallow. It's not easy to picture her like that, unsure, desperate, haunted. She always seemed so unshakable, but then again, the best performances are the ones you don't notice. She shifts gears suddenly. Do you remember the solstice ball? Yes. Vividly. It was chaos wrapped in silk and feathers. A masquerade as absurd as it was extravagant. You'd worn a fox mask. She'd worn no mask at all, just a crown of nightshade and moonstones, claiming her own face was disguise enough. We danced once, she writes. Only once. You stepped on my toes. I stepped on your pride. You smile at the memory. She had led the entire time, refusing to let go of your wrist. The court had watched with barely concealed horror. You'd been sure you'd be executed by dessert. Instead, she'd sent you a rose-shaped pastry afterward with a note. You're lucky I like pain. Classic. Afterward, she writes, now I went to the observatory alone. Watched the stars until morning. I wondered if they too felt trapped in their roles, doomed to shine even when they longed to flicker out. That's the thing with her. She turned everything into metaphor, even constellations. And yet, you can picture her there, shoulders hunched in satin, whispering her loneliness to Jupiter. You asked me once if I regretted the crown. You did. You asked her that on the day a child was publicly executed for stealing from a courtier. She'd looked out the window for a long time before answering no. But I regret the silence that followed. Now she writes yes. I regret it. Just that. Nothing more. A confession laid bare. She elaborates, I regret what it cost. Not the crown itself, but what it made me hide. What it made me sacrifice. What it turned to ash. There's no bitterness in the words. Just exhaustion. You notice a small change in her writing on this page. Her letters get smaller toward the bottom. As if the ink itself is running low. Or maybe she's writing from bed. Perhaps by candlelight, hunched over with the weight of time pressing against her spine. You were the one thing I couldn't rule, she continues. I could not order you to stop loving me. I could not decree your absence into comfort. A beat. I tried. Gods, I tried. Your hands tremble slightly as you read that, because you had always wondered, wondered whether your leaving had made her life easier, whether the quiet that followed your exile was relief or regret. Now you know. There are no statues of you in the palace, she writes. But there are echoes. You live in the curve of every hallway I avoid. In the West Wing garden I never pruned again. In the flute music I banned after hearing it once and sobbing in public. You wince. You remember that flutist. He'd played one of your melodies. You hadn't realized it echoed that far. Your memory is architecture, she writes. Unseen but load-bearing. You don't know whether to weep or laugh. She ends the page with one of her classic razor-edged truths. You told me once that forgetting is like setting fire to a library just to kill one spider. I tried. The fire didn't work, and the spider was me. You fold the page with reverence. There's a heat behind your eyes that you won't name. You picture her again, not in a throne room or war tent, but in her study pen in hand, trying to scratch meaning into the blank space that surrounded her for years. She may have ruled with masks and decrees, but here on this page she rules only with honesty. And it's stronger than any crown she ever wore. This page begins with a smudge, not ink, but something paler. Dust powder. You lift the parchment and sniff gently. It smells faintly of rosewater and cloves. Her winter perfume. The one she wore when the court grew cold and hearts colder. The script is slanting again, a bit uneven. You can picture her writing this in motion, perhaps during travel, or in one of those long silences she sometimes called private diplomacy. She never did like to sit still. They called me the Iron Widow. You frown. Yes, you remember. That title came after the war. The short, brutal one in which she outmaneuvered 2 kingdoms, sacrificed a cousin or 2, and walked away with double the land and half the respect. They said I was cold, she writes. And I was. But not to spite the world. I was cold to survive it. She's not asking for forgiveness. Not from you. Probably not from anyone. But still the words carry weight more than defense. They sound like resignation. I learned to grieve in pieces, she continues. Privately, strategically, the way generals do when they realize they've won too much. You nod without meaning to. Yes, that sounds like her. Victories that tasted like burnt bread and warm metal. She tells you now about a meeting with a foreign queen. She was younger, beautiful, smile like a girl who thought her throne would save her. Your breath catches. You know what's coming. She offered me a gift, an antique mirror with 7 silver edges. I saw myself in it. Not as I was. As I might have been. There's a long pause in the writing here. You imagine her staring into that mirror longer than she meant to. Mirrors are like poetry. That way they don't lie, but they don't help either. You once told me I never looked at myself unless I was performing. You did, and she didn't deny it. But that day I looked, and I hated what I saw. Not because I was old, not because I was tired, but because I didn't recognize the woman who had once loved a poet. You close your eyes. You're not sure you recognize yourself either. She writes, I had buried you metaphor by metaphor. I built walls of wit and spiked them with satire. But the mirror saw through all of it. You picture her there, a lone reflection flickering. No courtiers, no scrolls. Just her and a queen who didn't yet know how heavy a crown becomes in winter. I left that meeting and wandered the gardens, she continues. Found a tree stump where children once carved their initials. I added ours. Not initials, just a pair of quotation marks. Empty. You blink. Of course she did. Quotation marks. The shape of something unsaid. I often wonder what they'll write about me when I'm gone, she admits now. They'll say I was brilliant, ruthless, that I broke hearts and dynasties alike. And they will. You've already read some of the drafts. But I hope one person somewhere finds a sentence in a forgotten book and wonders who I was when I whispered. Not when I roared. That line slows your breath. She continues. You were the only person who made me whisper. You lower the page for a moment, needing to stare into the middle distance. The candle's flame has shrunk to a quivering dot, and its light makes the parchment glow like skin. She picks up the thread again. I kept your last poem in my bed for a week. I pressed it beneath my pillow like a love letter from a time I never lived. You know the one? You'd sent it through a third party. No reply ever came. You assumed it had been tossed unread into a fire. But it had stayed. With her. While she slept. I couldn't respond, she writes. Because if I started writing back, I wouldn't have stopped. A beat. And queens are not allowed to need. There it is. Not just her truth, but a truth written for every ruler who ever bled in silence. You taught me that words can be weapons, she writes. But you also taught me they can be blankets. You smile gently at the metaphor, and then she undercuts it as always. Unfortunately, I kept choosing the swords. Of course she did. She always said softness was a luxury you could only afford once you had sharpened your armor. She closes this page with a question. It's not rhetorical. Was I cruel? That's it. No decoration, no justification. Just 4 words. You stare at the question for longer than you expected. And though the page offers no space to reply, your heart sends back what your pen never did. No. Just scared. Just tired. Just human. You fold the page as gently as you've ever folded anything. She wasn't asking history for redemption. She was asking you. And somehow across time and silence and all those closed doors, she knew you'd understand. The next page is folded twice, not like the others creased at sharp angles and tucked with precision. This one feels different, more intimate, as if it had once lived inside a pocket. Or perhaps beneath a pillow waiting for a moment of courage. The paper is softer, too thinner, velvety worn at the edges. Like it was held often, opened, reread, and never sent. Your fingers trace the lines before you even begin reading. You already sense the tone has shifted again. The deep confessions have passed, and now you are entering sacred territory memory, stitched with longing, not regret. She opens without fanfare. You used to speak to animals when you thought no one was watching. You freeze. She noticed. Of course she did. You remember leaning over the stone wall to whisper to the hawks in the aviary, or humming to the dappled horses in the royal stables. You once convinced yourself a goose in the garden understood Latin. The raven liked you, she writes. The fat one with the broken beak. He only landed near 2 people, me and you. I think he liked that you never tried to feed him, only talked to him. You chuckle. That raven once stole one of your quills. You spent hours chasing it around the courtyard while the palace guards pretended not to laugh. I asked you once, she writes, why you did it. Why speak to beasts who can't reply? And you had answered without hesitation. Because sometimes silence is the kindest kind of answer. She never commented on that at the time. But now you were right. Sometimes silence is softer than love. Or maybe silence is love when the words would do more harm than good. You let your breath out slowly. That was always the undercurrent between you words left unspoken, not because you couldn't say them, but because saying them would mean accepting the consequences. She goes on. I kept quiet about you because I thought I was protecting you. Then almost immediately, but I see now I was protecting myself. Another small truth nestled between breaths. You imagine her writing this one night in bed lamp, flickering cats curled at her feet. Maybe she paused every few lines to stare into the fire. Maybe the fire stared back. She shifts now into another memory. Do you remember the snow, of course? That snowstorm, the one that came early and paralyzed the city. Everything muffled, the bells silenced, the market closed, the palace wrapped in white like an old woman in mourning. You came to my window, she writes, in boots too thin and a scarf too long. I pretended not to see you. You did come. You weren't supposed to. You knew you could be arrested just for appearing outside her private chambers. But you'd come anyway. No message, no summons. Just your foolish, stubborn hope wrapped in layers of wool and wet parchment. I watched you pace in the snow for half an hour, she writes. Then I turned away. I couldn't open the curtain. If I had, I would have left with you, and I wasn't allowed to leave. Your throat tightens. That day had haunted you for years. You'd told yourself she hadn't seen, that maybe she was away, or asleep, or indifferent. But she was watching the entire time. After you left, she continues, I wrote your name in the fog on the window pane. It faded in seconds, but for a moment you were inside. You stare at that line. Because that's what she always did. Find the smallest, gentlest ways to say I loved you. She pivots again lightly. The snow ruined my shoes. I had to hold court in slippers that squeaked. My enemies mistook the sound for weakness. You chuckle. You remember that rumor. One ambassador claimed she was possessed because she seemed to glide across the floor while the air squealed. I let them believe it, she adds. Let them fear the sound of surrender disguised as softness. That was her gift. Turning absurdity into power. She reflects again. There were so many almost between us. You nod. So many. Almost a kiss on the night of the comet. Almost a letter delivered before exile. Almost a life not divided by war duty and fear. But the almost she writes were sometimes sweeter than the actuals. They left room for dreaming. A pause. Did you dream of me? You close your eyes. Not a night passed in those early years without her shadow pressing against your sleep. Sometimes distant, sometimes warm, often wordless, always unreachable. You want to tell her yes, every version of you, every age, every crownless incarnation. I dreamed of them all. She writes, I hope your dreams were kinder than reality. I hope you imagine me barefoot laughing, carrying bread and not war. You did. And now, here in her own words, she gifts you a final memory. On the last morning before I became queen, I stood in the kitchens and stole a peach. I ate it over the sink, juice dripping down my wrist. No guards, no expectations, just sun on my back, and the taste of sweetness I didn't have to earn. You can see her clearly. A young woman with the world ahead of her, but none of its burdens yet. Just a peach, and the brief illusion that life might be simple. That version of me, she writes, the peach thief, I think she loved you most of all. You fold the page with a slow exhale. That girl is gone. The queen is gone. But this letter, their final duet, remains. And so does the snow. And the raven. And the sound of laughter between almosts. This page is different before you even touch it. The ink is faded as if diluted with tears or rain or time. It smells faintly of something earthy like pressed violets or old stone. You unfold it, and the parchment crinkles like dried leaves, reluctant to reveal what it holds. But it does. and her voice returns as clear as breath. I found the map again. You blink. The map. Her map. You remember the night she first showed it to you unrolled across her bed? Corners held down with cups of tea and a dagger? A map, not of lands or conquest, but of ideas. Emotions. People. It was the emotional topography of the palace, she'd called it. Ridiculous and brilliant. The cartographers called it madness, she writes, but I called it home. You remember the annotations tiers most likely here. Whispers behind this door. Where you stood the day I almost told the truth. No other ruler had ever mapped grief and affection with such precision, or with such arrogance. She continues, I marked you in gold ink. One small star in the west corner. You smile? You always suspected. I redrew the map every year, she writes. Sometimes I erased you only to add you back twice as large. There's a pause. Then I wonder if anyone will ever find it. Your fingers tighten slightly around the page. That map doesn't belong to the kingdom. It doesn't belong in a museum or among royal curiosities. It was hers. And now, perhaps it is yours. It's hidden beneath the floorboards of the observatory, she confesses. Inside the brass case marked weather instruments. I labeled it that way to make sure no one ever looked. You laugh out loud, startling the silence. She knew her courtiers too well. None of them would risk dusty fingers or unmeasured data. She shifts tone again, winding gently into metaphor. I always thought of you as a constellation. Not just one star too unstable for that, but a pattern. Something I could trace when the world grew incomprehensible. You picture her lying back on a velvet settee, eyes on the stars, hand outstretched, connecting invisible lines with ink-stained fingers. You said once that poetry is a kind of astronomy, she recalls. That we name things not to control them, but to remember they existed. You did say that. In a fit of lyricism you were slightly embarrassed by afterward. But she had remembered. Of course she had. I renamed a star for you, she writes, not officially. Just in my own sky. I called it the Poet's Compass. You don't know what to do with that. The knowledge that in her private galaxy you were not just remembered but named. She tells you then of a night long ago one you almost forgot. There was a comet, she writes. You wrote a haiku on my palm, with your finger. It vanished in seconds. But I memorized it. You had assumed she was ignoring you that night. That your silly little gesture was lost under layers of brocade and protocol. But she'd memorized it. 7 words, she writes. But enough to last years. You wish you could remember what they were. She does. But she doesn't write them here. She keeps them for herself. And you respect that. She continues, I used to climb to the tower when I couldn't sleep. I'd wrap myself in your old cloak, the one that smelled of ink and storm, and sit with the map and the stars. You remember that cloak. You'd left it behind one summer damp from travel and too worn to matter. But to her, it was memory incarnate. I looked ridiculous, she admits. But I felt like myself again. Not the queen, not the widow, just the woman who used to listen to you breathe as you scribbled in corners. That image, that gentle domestic memory is a dagger wrapped in velvet. You'd always assumed your silence in the corner went unnoticed, but she'd noticed everything. If memory is a map, she writes, then I hope mine leads you home. You pause, because that is not poetry. That is prayer. She ends the page with something quietly devastating. They say a ruler's legacy is written in stone, but I carved mine in stars, and I traced your name in every one. You fold the page with shaking hands. Because this wasn't just a love letter, it was a star chart, a guide, a secret record of a hidden life you both lived in, glances, silences, and echoes. And now in your hands the map is complete. This page is stained. Not dramatically, just a faint splash of something like tea or ink. The kind of stain that suggests a page carried with someone perhaps clutched in a moment of hesitation, folded and unfolded too many times before ever being tucked into its final resting place. It begins not with her usual elegance. Just this, I didn't want to die in velvet. You stop. Because this line, short, unceremonious, naked, says more than any metaphor ever could. I asked them not to dress me in the royal colors, she writes. They ignored me, of course. The dead don't get to protest. Your throat tightens. You can see it now, her still form beneath embroidered cloth adorned with ribbons of state and stiff brocade, her hair arranged by hands that didn't know how it used to fall loose in the early mornings, hands that had never held her when she was still humming. She goes on, I wanted to be buried in linen. Something soft. Something that breathed. You imagine the quiet revolt this request must have been. Queens aren't supposed to want comfort. They are meant to wear symbolism to the grave. But I suppose symbolism won, she adds. As it usually does. She pivots now toward a more tender recollection. Do you remember the firefly jars you do? You'd once caught fireflies for her during a countryside retreat, trapping their flickering bodies in a glass jar with holes poked in the lid. A child's gesture, really. She had kept them beside her bed. I let them go the next morning, she writes. You never noticed. I didn't want them to die caged. You hadn't noticed. But you remember wondering why the room smelled like summer that day. She continues. There was a moment once when I considered fleeing, disappearing entirely, leaving the crown, the court, the ghosts behind, just vanishing into the hills with your poetry of my only luggage. You stop reading for a moment. That moment, had it truly existed. You remember rumors, a sudden trip delayed, a royal caravan rerouted. You hadn't dared hope it was for you. I planned it, she writes. I even wrote you a letter. I packed a box with 2 loaves of bread and a sapphire ring I never wore. Then simply, but I couldn't go. A breath leaves you slowly. She doesn't explain why. She doesn't need to. Duty? Fear? The sheer gravity of the crown. All of it held her in place. They would have called it abandonment, she writes. I would have called it mercy. The ink on the page shifts lighter streaked as if the pen was running dry or her grip had faltered. I tried to be brave, she writes. But I think bravery isn't loud. It's not in speeches or battlefields. It's in staying when you want to run. In silence when you want to scream. In writing letters that will never be read. And here you feel it. She is nearing the end. Not the letter's end. Hers. There's a line that comes suddenly unannounced. They told me I was dying 2 months before I told anyone else. Your body stills. I kept it to myself. Not to hoard the pain, but to preserve the illusion for just a while longer that there was still time to fix everything. She'd faced death as she faced everything else privately with stubborn poise and unspoken sorrow. I began this letter the next day, she writes. Not because I wanted you to mourn me, but because I couldn't bear the thought of leaving without saying it finally fully. She doesn't say what it is, but you know, all of this is it. She reflects once more on the firefly jar. I was the jar. The palace was the lid, and your love the flicker inside me that never died even when the air grew thin. You fold your arms on the desk, Rest your forehead against them. It's too much. And yet it's exactly enough. She ends this page with the most human line she's ever written. If they ask how I died, tell them I slipped quietly into a poem. You smile. Not because it's funny, but because, of course, she would choose poetry over heaven, metaphor over mourning. You fold the page with hands gentler than you thought you had left in you. And as the candle beside you flutters barely a breath of light now, you sit in silence and whisper aloud. You didn't die in velvet. You lived in verse. This page is thinner than the others, translucent in the candlelight, delicate enough to tear if you blink too hard. But the ink is bolder than usual, perhaps written with a heavier hand, or perhaps it's simply the gravity of what she's chosen to say. She begins mid-thought again, as if the quiet between pages was never silence, but just a breath I dreamt of you last night. You sit up straighter without meaning to. It feels absurd after all this time to react like this to a line of ink, but it's her voice. It still stirs something in you like the rattle of shutters just before the rain. She continues. You were older. So was I. We had a garden. A real one, not the sculpted kind. Wild and unruly and honest. You were pulling weeds and grumbling about slugs. I was pretending not to eat all the figs before they ripened. You smile. You've never owned a garden. Never liked figs either. But still you know this dream. You've had it too. Different details, same feeling, that imagined life neither of you were ever allowed. There were no guards, she writes, no titles, no watchers, just you and me and the sound of bees. She lingers in this dream longer than usual. And you let her. Because it's a mercy for her. And for you. You had a little ink stain on your thumb. I teased you about it. You told me it was a birthmark, and I believed you. She goes on. We didn't speak of the past. We didn't need to. We were too full of it already. It was there in the way we walked, the way we didn't rush. The way we sat with silence like it was a guest at our table. You can see it. The way you'd sit beneath an arbor she built herself badly, no doubt, because she hated carpentry and sipped something strong and sweet while the sun moved lazily overhead. And then the dream darkens just slightly. Eventually I woke up, she writes, but I didn't open my eyes. I kept them shut as long as I could. I wanted to stay. Not because it was perfect, but because it was ours. You lower the page briefly, staring into the flame. You've done the same, lingered in sleep, just to keep holding her hand for one more breath of imagined morning. She continues. When I did open my eyes, there was a robin on the sill. The same one, I think, who nested in the olive tree outside my chamber last spring. He stared at me, head tilted, like he'd been watching the dream too. Another small echo. She always believed in omens, not because she was superstitious, but because she liked the idea that the universe might be listening when no one else was. I told him everything she writes. The robin, I mean, about you, about the garden, about the figs. You laugh softly. She probably did. You remember catching her once in the aviary, whispering to a dove as if giving it instructions for state policy. When you teased her, she just said, "Feathers listen better than men." She pivots then to something more grounded. I've left instructions, she writes, not for monuments, not for a statue, just for a box. You read on inside a scarf, a notebook, a silver thimble, and one unopened letter. Yours. Your breath hitches. You'd sent it before exile, before silence. You'd begged the steward to deliver it. No reply ever came. You thought it lost, burned, ignored. But she'd kept it. I never opened it, she writes, not out of cruelty. Out of reverence. It was your final word. And I didn't want it to end. The ache behind your ribs pulses like a second heartbeat. You once said that unopened letters are the most honest kind, she reminds you, because they hold everything, every possibility, every tone, until they are read and ruined by knowing. You did say that. In a moment of performative wisdom you didn't expect anyone to remember. She remembered. If I could rewrite history, she adds, I wouldn't start at the throne. I'd start at your door. I'd knock. I'd say the thing I swallowed for 20 years. She doesn't say what it is. She doesn't have to. You know it by now. It's there in every pause, every laugh, every scribbled regret. The garden is gone now, she writes. Or maybe it never was. But if I ever find you again wherever it is poets go when they die, I hope you're still pulling weeds. Still cursing slugs. Still saving me the last fig. You fold the page slowly. And this time when you do, you don't feel the sting of loss. You feel her presence close, familiar, real. The queen of empires. The woman of thrones and treaties and fire. And beneath all of that, the girl with bare feet eating stolen fruit and dreaming of a garden you almost shared. This page is heavier vellum, not paper. The kind used for royal decrees and marriage contracts. An odd choice perhaps, but one that makes sense the moment you begin reading. Because this page is not written like the others. It's a promise. They asked me to write a second will. You pause heart-stilling. You hadn't thought of such things not in these letters, but of course they did. The ministers, the council, the vultures in silk gloves. Queens are property in life, and even more so in death. The first one, she continues, is for the court. It lists what they expect: jewels, titles, horses, land. You know this version. The public script, the empty theater of inheritance, but this, she writes, is the real one. You read on. To my brother the mask I wore for him every winter. May it itch, you smirk. A sharp opening. To the palace tailor the red thread he never stopped using, even when I asked for blue. May it tangle. She's settling scores now, but softly with silk, rather than steel. To the courtiers who praised me in verse and betrayed me in prose, my silence. May it echo. And then, to you, my poet, my breath. My pauses, my unsaid. You go still. You already have my stories, my edges, my foolishness. But I want you to have the space between them too. You frown slightly, rereading. I want you to have the in-betweens, the almost. The sentences I began and never finished. The thoughts that trembled too much to put down. She is bequeathing you her unfinishedness. I'm giving you the rights to every margin I ever left blank. You don't move. Because this isn't metaphor. Not entirely. She means it. The scattered pages, the drafts. The diary entries smudged by night. The unsent notes and half-formed lines you'll now have to interpret like riddles in smoke. I once told a bishop that legacy is a lie, she writes, that people remember the wrong parts, the loudest days, the worst decisions, but never the real moments, never the mornings when a queen just sits in her nightgown and peels an orange with her teeth. You chuckle despite yourself. She hated oranges, but she loved small rebellions. This page, she writes, is for that version of me, the one who woke up cold and missed you before the sun rose. You let your fingers rest lightly on the vellum. The texture is uneven in places her quill must have pressed hard, as if the words themselves resisted being caught. She continues, I told the scribes to keep one ring off the record. Not a royal band, not an heirloom, just a brass ring I wore on my toe the summer you taught me how to swim. You remember that summer, the lake house, the reeds. her furious insistence that water was a ridiculous thing to trust. The moment she finally let go of the dock, thrashing, laughing, triumphant. They'll find it one day, she writes. They'll think it was a charm or a superstition. Let them, and then more softly. But know this, it was for you. You were the only thing I ever let myself sink into without fear. You swallow hard. Her rhythm slows now. The lines stretch farther apart like she's writing slower, perhaps in pain. Perhaps nearing sleep. If I had married you, she writes, we would have been poor. Probably miserable. Arguing over ink costs and fig rations, you grin. You did once argue over ink costs and figs. But I would have woken up each day knowing who I was. Not a title, not a silhouette. Just yours. A beat. That would have been enough. There's a pause in the ink. A tiny dot where her quill must have rested. And then I tried to write you a song once. You raise your eyebrows. This is new. It was terrible. The rhyme scheme made the cat flee. I hid it in a drawer. Then burned the drawer. You laugh. Of course she did. But now she writes, if I could write you a final verse, it would be this. And then without warning, without flourish, she offers it. A simple 4-line poem, I was the flame. You were the page. I left my ash on every stage. You stare at it. Not because it's perfect, but because it's hers. Unadorned. Unsmoothed. Utterly true. She closes the page with this, you may publish this if you like. Or bury it. Or whisper it to a bird. I don't mind. I wrote it for your hands, not their eyes. You fold the vellum carefully, reverently. This wasn't a will, it was a key. To her silences, to her shadows, to her long, impossible love. And now it is yours. This page is different before you even touch it. It crackles slightly at the corners, brittle with age or maybe intention. There's a light watermark, an insignia of a bird mid-flight, one you recognize but can't quite name. She never used stationery with symbols, except once. This was paper reserved for state apologies, and here she is writing to you with it. I told too many lies, but none crueler than the one where I said you meant nothing. You stop reading, close your eyes, and breathe through it. You remember the moment. The garden, the storm, the betrayal disguised as indifference. She had dismissed you with a glance, a phrase carefully calculated for volume and cruelty. You carried those words for years. I needed to make you leave, she writes, because you were the one thing I couldn't afford to lose in pieces. You look at the page, and then look past it, because now you see the truth. She wasn't protecting her crown. She was protecting the version of herself that still believed in being known deeply and without armor. She continues, they taught me to amputate emotions cleanly, but you weren't a limb I couldn't sever you. You were marrow. You feel that line land somewhere low in your chest. I tried to unwrite you, she confesses, with distractions, decrees, wars, with other voices, other hands, but none of it erased your name from the space just behind my eyes. That's where you lived, the place between her gaze and her mask. Once I tried to copy your handwriting, she admits suddenly. I wanted to understand how your thoughts curved. I failed. My lines were too straight, too afraid. You chuckle softly. She'd once mocked your handwriting as a goat learning calligraphy, but she tried to copy it. That matters more than any compliment. She shifts into another memory, one you'd long buried. You left your gloves behind. I never returned them. You freeze. The gloves, worn leather ink-stained, left beside a pitcher of wine on a night you'd stormed out heartburning. You'd never gone back. I wore them once alone, she writes, to see if I could hold what you held. They were too big, too soft. I cried into them. You never knew. You assumed she'd toss them. You assumed everything you left was discarded. I stored them in a box labeled "Burn Later." But I never did. She pauses. And so do you. She moves gently into metaphor again. Love, I think, is a kind of theft. You stole my solitude. I stole your silence. Neither of us asked for it back. You feel the truth of that. Even now, even across years and titles and the finality of this letter, you're still carrying each other's stolen pieces. She reflects next on something neither of you ever named. I never apologized. There it is. Just that. No qualifiers, no excuse. She doesn't even say what for because it doesn't matter anymore. You both know. Every silence that should have been a whisper. Every look that came a moment too late. Every page that stayed blank. She adds more softly, I wish I had been braver with you. You wonder what bravery would have looked like. Her hand in yours in public. A letter signed not with riddle, but with your real name. A single I love you not wrapped in irony. Perhaps all of it. Perhaps none. She shifts now into a kind of ritual. I tore one page from every journal I kept. Just one. Always the same day each month. I kept them in a drawer marked Unfinished Prayers. You had your own version of this unwritten stanzas, burned poems, songs hummed only once. You called them your ghost drafts. Apparently so did she. If you ever find them she writes, you'll know which ones are about you. They're the ones that flinch. A long pause. Then, you were never my weakness. You were the proof I had a soul. The candle beside you wavers. It's not out, not yet, but it's close. She adds, when they lay me in state, they will say many things. That I was strategic, that I was dangerous, that I was unforgettable. A beat. Let them say it. Then, but if anyone asks what I loved, truly loved, tell them it was the sound of your breath when you were writing. You blink quickly. Once, twice. The words blur just slightly, but you don't wipe your eyes. She ends the page simply, I am sorry. And beneath it, I am yours. No crown, no title. Just that. You fold the page with trembling hands. And for the first time you forgive her. Not because she asked, but because she remembered the gloves. This page carries no scent. It feels untouched by perfume, undisturbed by ritual. Even the paper is plain, coarse, lightly creased, the kind found in servants' quarters or wrapped around parcels of bread. But her handwriting is unmistakable, and that alone transforms it into something sacred. She begins. I never told you about the mirror. You frown. Not the philosopher's mirror, the one from your old stories, the one said to show a person's soul instead of their reflection? No, this is something different. It was hidden in my childhood chamber behind a wall panel that only opened when the sun hit it just right. You lean in. You've never heard her mention this before. I found it by accident, she writes. I was 13, and still small enough to fit inside the crawl space without bending my knees. She describes it now in soft, haunting detail, a tall, clouded mirror framed in cracked silver. Its surface warped ever so slightly. It didn't reflect clearly, it shimmered. Like heat over stone. Or memory. They told me it had belonged to my grandmother, she writes, but no one ever used it. The older maids called it cursed. The priest called it blasphemous. I called it mine. You picture her there, knees drawn to her chest, candle in hand, staring into a glass that didn't give back answers, only questions. A future queen, whispering secrets into something that couldn't speak back. I used to talk to it, she writes. Not like a girl hoping for magic, like a girl hoping anyone would listen. Your chest aches. She'd always seemed so composed, so wrapped in poise and precision. You forget sometimes how young she'd been when the throne first reached for her like a hungry god. One night, she writes, I brought one of your poems there, the one you swore you didn't care about. You remember the one. You wrote it on a dare. It was sloppy, weirdly romantic, and ended with a line about weather and elbows. You thought she hated it. I read it aloud to the mirror, she writes, and when I finished, I waited, as if the glass might applaud. You grin. That sounds like her. She adds, it didn't clap, of course, but it didn't crack either, and I took that as a sign. You wonder now how many of your verses ended up in that secret crawl space, echoing off warped glass and soft candlelight. She shifts suddenly, returning to the present. I went back there last week. You freeze. This is recent then. Close to the end. I had to crawl again like I was 13 all over. It was dusty, but still there. Still waiting. She describes the silence of the space, thick, total humming. And the mirror still warped. Still watching. I brought a hairpin and scratched something into the back, she writes. Not words, just a mark. A line that turns, then splits like a fork in a road. You recognize the symbol? You'd once doodled it into the margins of a letter long ago. It was meaningless then. Now it's a message. If you ever find it, she writes, you'll know I was there. That a part of me stayed behind waiting. You glance around your study. Half walls, books, dust, and this candle burning lower now, hardly more than a sigh. I've left no heirs, she writes. Not in blood. But I hope you'll take the mirror as inheritance. You tilt your head. A mirror you've inherited. Books, letters, echoes. But now she offers you a relic, something more than metaphor. Something to find. She writes, they'll bury me with sapphires, but my soul is hidden in that wall. With your poem. With the candle stub. With the crack in the silver. You stare at the parchment, reading the next line more slowly. I wish you'd seen me that night. Hair loose. Knees muddy. Whispering to no one in particular. And then a turn. Do you believe in echoes? She lets the question sit for a moment. I think love echoes. I think the soul echoes. I think words, real ones, yours, never die. They just find new walls to bounce off. A pause. I hope you've kept writing. You haven't. Not really. Not since her. Not the way you used to. Not the kind that leaves a part of you behind. She must have known that. Because she adds, even if you stop the part of me that knew you never did? She ends the page with a whisper so soft it barely lands on the paper. Say my name aloud. Once. Just once. Let it echo. You fold the letter slowly, every crease like a closing door. And in the stillness of your scriptorium, with only the candle for witness, you speak her name. Quietly. Not like a declaration. Like a memory. Like a song you hum in the dark, hoping someone somewhere is humming too. This page is heavier, stiffer, like it was written during a moment of decision. The parchment is darker, almost golden, with tiny fibers woven through it. A ceremonial page, perhaps. The kind reserved for royal proclamations or farewells, not meant to be softened. Yet the first words are as human as ever. You once asked me why I never remarried. You had. It was a rare night, wine stars, a fire that crackled without witnesses. She hadn't answered then, just stared into her cup and said, because they're all too alive. Now she answers, because no one ever made silence feel as full as you did. You stopped blinking, That was your language. Silence as fullness. She had once mocked the idea, called it sentimental nonsense. And now, here it is engraved in her final letter. Marriage to me was always a transaction, she continues. But with you, I would have bartered everything just for the right to fall asleep in the same chair. You remember that chair. The old one by her window. The one that tilted slightly to the left and had a loose thread you always fidgeted with when nervous. You'd sat there while she read dispatches, while she dozed, while she watched you from the corner of her eye and pretended not to. She turns now to an anecdote you'd forgotten. I saw you once in the temple garden. You were talking to a little girl. You let her braid a flower into your hair. You blink. Yes. A moment you barely recall. She'd run up to you all dirt and giggles and tiny fingers, and you let her pluck a blossom from the temple path and nestle it into your curls. You didn't flinch. You didn't look around to see who was watching. You just let her do it. And smiled. A pause. I've never been more jealous in my life. You laugh. Not because it's funny, but because it's so her. Capable of orchestrating political unions, conquering cities with words, and undone by a child's spontaneous affection toward you. I told myself I was angry at the breach of decorum, she writes. But the truth, I just wanted to be the one to touch your hair without asking. The candle flickers beside you. It agrees. She continues. They will say I was married to the kingdom. And they will. The histories are already written. The portraits already hung. But they won't mention the afternoons I spent rereading your letters instead of writing legislation, or the time I delayed a council vote just to hear the end of your new poem. You remember that poem. It was a meandering mess. She'd loved it. I once ordered a diplomat to wait in the antechamber for 4 hours because you were asleep in my library. You stare. You hadn't known. He thought it was punishment, she writes. It was mercy. For both of us. Then comes a confession heavier than the rest. I almost summoned you. Twice. Your breath catches. Once when the snow fell too early and the walls felt smaller than usual. And once when I lost my voice for 2 days and realized I missed being spoken to, not just listened to. You remember those snows, the sudden hush across the city, the strange emptiness that pressed into your windows. You'd felt her absence then without knowing why. But I didn't, she says, because summoning you meant choosing vulnerability. And I still wore the crown. She always said the crown didn't weigh much, but you knew the weight wasn't physical. She turns now to a softer image. You had a way of walking like you were always slightly lost but enjoying it. You grinned. You were always slightly lost in the palace. The corridors twisted on purpose like the architect had a grudge. You made even confusion seem poetic, she adds. I hated you for it, and I loved you for it. She begins a list now, but it's not like the earlier ones. It's not made of spite or jokes. It's a list of moments, quiet ones. The night you hummed in your sleep and I stayed awake listening. The time you mistook my perfume bottle for ink and ruined your poem. The morning you made me laugh during prayer. Each memory lands softly like petals pressed between pages. And then I wrote your name into my coronation oath. Not aloud, just in my head. You stare. She hadn't even looked at you during the coronation. She'd been a pillar of grace and command, but now you know your name echoed silently beneath her breath as she accepted the crown. You once told me I'd make a terrible wife, she writes. You weren't wrong, but I would have been yours gladly. A pause. Then, if there's another life, another world, I hope we meet without ceremony. I hope I find you in a library, or a bakery, or walking barefoot through an orchard. You picture it. Her without titles, you without exile. Just two people stumbling into one another again. And I'll say she adds, "You look familiar." And you'll say, "So do you." And we'll never need to explain. She ends this page not with a farewell, but with a wish. I hope you find someone who reads you slowly, the way I should have. You fold the page, eyes damp, lips parted, as if you want to reply, but the only answer is the quiet, the candle, the weight of everything she never said out loud. Until now. This page arrives like dusk, soft fading touched by melancholy. The edges are singed just barely, perhaps from a nearby hearth, perhaps from hesitation. But it holds, and so does the ink, which flows here with a strange clarity, as if the words were written not in ink but in breath. She opens with a moment I sat beside a dying tree today. You picture her cloaked perhaps in her simplest robes alone in a quiet courtyard where autumn comes early. You know the one. The ash tree by the west wing, the one that had grown slanted over the years, roots like veins trying to escape the soil. Its leaves were the color of confession, she writes. I watched one fall and thought, so that's how letting go should feel. She's more poetic now. Not stylized, pure, unburdened. She's not trying to impress anymore, not trying to hide. She's just speaking. They say a queen must die with dignity. I've always found that word strange. Dignity is just silence wrapped in stiff fabric. You can hear her scoff in the back of your mind. I don't want dignity, she writes. I want honesty. And here it is, you lean closer, already bracing. I am afraid. You stop. Because she would never say this aloud. Not to her generals, not to her gods. Maybe not even to herself. But here it is offered to you with nothing but parchment between it and the world. Not afraid of death, she clarifies. Afraid I will leave without being understood. You close your eyes. Isn't that what all of us want to be seen just once fully? Without translation. Without defense. They will remember my voice, she continues, but not what it trembled to say. You inhale slowly. They will write books about my strategy, my reforms, my wars. A pause, but not about the way I read bedtime stories to the cook's daughter when her mother was ill. You didn't know that. You wonder how many stories like that will never be told. They won't remember that I cried when the kitchen boy died, she writes. Or that I fasted for 3 days because I couldn't bear to eat what he used to prepare. You remember that season. She claimed she was purifying her spirit. It had seemed theatrical at the time. Now you know the truth. They will say, I ruled without softness, she writes. But you knew. You saw it. The softness buried under iron and law. You nod. You did see it. In her laugh when you mispronounced words on purpose. In the way her eyes flickered toward the door every time you left. In the silent offerings books, scarves, soup left untouched but still warm. She continues. I sometimes wonder what kind of queen I would have been if I had loved first, then ruled. You pause, eyes stinging. Instead, I ruled first and loved in margins. There it is. The summary of everything between you. Love scribbled in spaces between decrees and alliances. Love caught in the breath between public declarations and private restraint. I didn't love you in secret because I was ashamed, she writes. I loved you in secret because it was the only part of my life not owned by anyone else. You stare at the candle now no more than a thumb-sized glow. In a world where everyone knew my name, she writes, you were the only person who called me nothing and meant everything. A silence follows in the ink. Then more softly, there's a drawer in my dressing room no one's ever opened. It holds one thing, a handkerchief. Yours. Torn. Stained. Faintly perfumed with jasmine and regret. You remember that handkerchief? You'd used it to wipe ink from her cheek once. It had torn on the edge of her brooch. You thought it lost. I kept it because it was ruined, she writes. Because so were we. And still I wanted to keep something. She pauses. You said once that broken things tell better stories. You did. You said it about pottery. And hearts. Then let us be a great story, she writes. The kind they whisper about. Not because of what we did, but because of what we could have done. You fold the page slowly like tucking in a child after a nightmare. She ends the letter not with words, but with a tiny hand-drawn image. 2 parallel lines. One labeled yours, the other mine. They never touch, but they run beside each other. Forever. This page is creased down the middle, not from folding, but from being gripped tightly. You can almost see the thumbprint where pressure once pressed the ink into the grain of the parchment. It feels warm even now, like someone had held it too long before letting it go. She starts abruptly. They asked me for my final words. You hold your breath. Not to you, to the realm, of course. I said something noble, predictable, a line from a play no one remembers. I wanted them to believe I was still in control. You can picture it, her body reclining in silks. Ministers gathered, a scribe ready, everyone waiting for a quote to carve into stone, and all she gave them was theater. But you and I both know she writes my real last words were written here. You let that sit, because it's true. She continues. I kept writing long after they thought I couldn't. You imagine her in bed, tired, wrapped in candlelight and shadow, quill balanced between fingers that once signed treaties, now scratching confessions onto stolen pages? They said it was madness, to write to someone who wasn't there. I said it was remembrance, a breath. You were always more real to me in absence than anyone else was in presence. She tells you now of a moment you never witnessed. They brought me a portrait. Commissioned. Grand. Too much silk, not enough truth. You smile. She always hated how artists tried to gild her instead of seeing her. I asked if they could paint a version of me smiling. A pause. They said it would seem undignified. You can hear her laugh in that line. So I asked for a second portrait, one that would never be displayed. One for you. Your fingers twitch. She continues. It's hidden behind the east tapestry, the one with the owl. Behind it, me unsmiling but softer. Hair down, bare hands, no crown. You can see it. A version of her stripped of legacy, of expectation, of armor. I had them include one detail no one else would understand. A tiny ribbon, ink-stained, draped across my lap. Your ribbon, from that first summer. You'd worn it in your hair until it frayed, then used it as a bookmark. You never knew she noticed when you left it behind. But she did. She always did. If you find it, she writes, keep it. Not as a relic, as a reminder. A reminder of what she answers before you can ask that there was a version of me only you ever saw. She shifts briefly to a memory buried so deeply you thought it belonged to someone else. Do you remember the rain in the desert? You do. A diplomatic journey. A sandstorm that turned to rain just as hope gave out. You'd both stood there laughing like fools soaked and ridiculous watching the horizon vanish. You said the desert smelled like old paper when it rained. You'd forgotten that line. She didn't. I told you it smelled like forgiveness, she writes. And maybe in that moment it did. She reflects now not just on herself but on endings. We are not stories. We are the spaces between them, the breath before the final word, the ink blot at the bottom of the page. You feel that truth settle in your chest. Not all love needs a climax. Some love just is. They'll remember the queen she writes. But I want you to remember the girl with cold feet and ink on her wrist who once told the bird all her secrets. And you do. You always will. She adds, if the gods are kind, we'll be unfinished somewhere else. A pause. Then if they are cruel, they'll make me watch you forget me. But that's not possible. Not anymore. She closes this page with a whisper, barely there I was yours. I am yours. Even now. And beneath it, say it back. Say it into the candlelight. I'll be listening. You don't fold the page right away. You just sit there. Still, letting the candle flicker like a heartbeat. And then quietly you say what you've always known, I am yours too. This page is smoother than the last. Thin, pale, almost translucent under the fading candlelight. As if this single piece was never meant to carry weight, but to be light enough to drift, like ash or a sigh. You unfold it gently. It opens easily like it has been waiting. She begins, not with a memory, not with a regret, but with a question. Have you ever heard the sound of your name when no one says it? You pause. Because yes, you have. It's the quiet pull in your chest when the wind turns a certain way. It's the murmur behind dreams you forget as soon as you wake. It's the ache of being missed by someone no longer able to reach you. I hear yours, she writes. All the time. And then, in the turning of pages, in creaking door hinges, in the stretch of dawn before the birds remember how to sing. You let your eyes close for a moment, because this is where she lives now in the liminal places. The in-betweens. The not quite and the almost. She writes, there are places I've left pieces of you. A list follows. Gentle, unassuming. The chair by the library window. The third stair that always squeaked. The bell that never rang at the west gate. Each one small, unimportant to others, but to you anchors. You haunt the palace, she writes, not like a ghost, like a favorite phrase I can't quite translate. And that, yes, that is exactly what you are to her. Untranslatable, unresolved, necessary. She shifts tone now, lightens briefly. I still remember how you ate cherries. You smile, so careful like each one might be poisoned, or sacred, or both. She goes on. I watched you once through a lattice window. You dropped a cherry pit and looked around mortified. I laughed so hard I choked on my tea. You remember that moment. The silence. The stain on the tile. You hadn't known anyone saw, but of course she did. I laughed so rarely near the end, she writes. But when I did, it was always near something that reminded me of you. She pauses. I think that's how we live on. Through laughter. Through the softness we leave behind. Then comes a question you never expected. Do you think I was brave? You do. But she answers herself before you can. I wasn't. Not really. Not in the way the songs will claim. I was just relentless. And sometimes that looks the same. A beat. You were the brave one. Your eyes sting. To love me without certainty. To stay when there was no invitation. To leave without demanding to be followed. You never wanted to be followed. You just wanted to be remembered. She knew that. She shifts now to a story. There was a night I woke suddenly, from nothing, just a jolt, and I swore I heard you say my name. A breath. I sat up, lit a candle, listened. Nothing. But still she says I whispered, I'm sorry, into the dark. Not because I knew what I'd done, but because I knew it had hurt you. You close your eyes. You remember waking in the middle of that same night. Heart racing, no sound, just her name in your mouth, unspoken. Some chords stretch across oceans, others across silence. She continues. If this letter ever finds your hands, I want you to know every time I said nothing, it was because I was afraid that if I said something, I wouldn't survive the sound. And that makes sense. Because words for her were not ornaments, they were instruments, sharpened, weighted, each one a choice. But you, she writes, spoke like someone who believed every sentence could be forgiven. She was right. You always believed that. Even now. She closes the page differently this time. Not with an image. Not with a line of poetry. Just this don't stop reading. A pause. I'm not done yet. You fold the page slowly, pressing your thumb to the edge like sealing it with presence. The candle's light has shrunk to a soft breath. A whisper. And so you whisper back, I won't stop. This page is creased diagonally, as if once folded hastily, then smoothed with care. The corners curl just a bit, as if from nervous fingertips lingering too long. The ink here is uneven, richer in some places, faint in others. You imagine her writing in a low light, perhaps with trembling hands. She begins with a scene. There was a comet last week. You sit up slightly. You'd seen it too. A silver smear across a navy sky, the kind of celestial visitor that made everyone stop pretending their lives were bigger than the stars. They all gathered on the terraces, she writes, pretending to care. Make us wishes. A pause. I didn't, of course not. I watched it alone. No crown, no shoes. Just a shawl and the ghost of your hand beside mine. You can picture her there, feet bare against cold stone, silver light pooling in her eyes, a kind of quiet that few ever got to see. I remembered how you said stars are just old light finally arriving. You had said that. And now it echoes perfectly timed, like she'd been waiting years to remind you. It made me wonder what else takes years to arrive. She lets that question linger, and then she answers it herself. Maybe this letter, you feel it. Maybe the courage to say what I couldn't say when I had a throne beneath me and too many eyes above. Her voice is soft now. Slower. The tone of someone who is not just nearing the end of a letter, but nearing the end of breath. There's a kind of freedom in endings. You can sense her smiling just faintly. No more politics, no more alliances, just confessions. Then, like a curtain being pulled back, I kept your first letter. You blink. You'd long assumed she burned it. You were young when you wrote it, too earnest, too flowery, full of metaphors about moons and mirrors. It was awful, she says bluntly, but it was honest. You grin. I read it once a year, she writes. On the day I crowned myself in the mirror, not with jewels, but with resolve. She continues, the day I chose the kingdom over you. A silence opens in the parchment, like she's leaving space for you to breathe. Or cry. You do both. I told myself I had no choice, she says. But that was a lie I wore like perfume. Sweet. Expensive. Disappearing when the room emptied. She shifts tone now, trying for something lighter. Do you remember when I tried to bake you laugh aloud? Yes. The kitchen had nearly burned down. She insisted on making bread for the festival without knowing the difference between flour and powdered chalk. You said it tasted like betrayal and regret. You did. She never forgot. I kept the burnt loaf, she admits. It sat in my wardrobe for weeks until it turned to dust. Still better than most state dinners. She turns serious again. You always told me I was better when I laughed. You did. She hated it. Because it was true. That's why I loved you. Not because you admired me, but because you disarmed me. You feel that like a whisper across your cheek. She writes, I wore the armor. You made me forget it was there. Then she returns softly to the comet. They said it was an omen, a sign from the heavens, a beat. But I think it was just light finally arriving. You exhale slowly? Maybe I'm light too, she says. Old, delayed. On my way to you at last. She ends this page with just 5 words. Please don't stop reading yet. And beneath it, I'm almost done pretending. You fold the page like a relic, your heart slow, your breath quiet. There are fewer pages left now, but each one holds eternity. This page is oddly pristine. No creases, no smudges, no candle wax tears or thumbprint ghosts. As if at the moment she wrote it, her hand was finally still. There's a centeredness to the handwriting here. Each line balanced like breath after crying, like the hush that comes after a decision. She starts, I had a dream about you. You sit back slowly. Not the young version. Not the poet with ink-stained fingers and that ridiculous scarf. You smile. The scarf had birds on it. You thought it looked whimsical. She said it made you look like a court jester. And yet you caught her wearing it once alone late. You were older, she writes, and so was I. She paints it gently. We sat beneath a tree I didn't recognize, but I knew the feel of its shade. You were reading something out loud? Not one of your poems. Something small. Domestic. A letter, maybe. You try to remember the dream, but of course you can't. It was hers, not yours. And yet, somehow you remember it anyway. I asked you what it said, she continues, and you smiled and said, it says I love you in 6 different ways. You close your eyes. I asked you to read it again. You said I already knew it by heart. She continues, when I woke, I cried. Not because it wasn't real, but because it felt more real than anything else that day. You know that feeling. You've lived in it for years. She returns briefly to memory I watched a play yesterday. My own life rewritten. They had me tame dragons, outwit gods, refuse every suitor like a marble statue with a sword. You can hear her roll her eyes. They turned me into a myth. She pauses. But I was never a myth to you. You nod silently. You knew the sound of her slippers on stone, the way she always tapped her teacup twice before drinking. The tiny scar on her left wrist from a rose thorn no one else remembered. You knew the version of me who forgot how to finish sentences when I was tired, who hummed lullabies out of key, who sometimes asked questions she didn't want answered. You did, and that version was the one you loved. You never asked me to be wise, she writes, just to be present. She shifts again, looking forward instead of back. If there's anything left of me when the candles go out, I hope it's this letter. A pause. Not the crown, not the legacy. Just this. Then comes the softest line yet. I am writing this in my favorite robe. You smile surprised. She had a favorite, the green one. The one you hated because it had sleeves like a drowning bird. You remember it now. It always trailed behind her like seaweed. But she loved it. I wear it now because it feels like you. Messy, soft, impossible to forget. The candle beside you gutters. Low now. Almost gone. She continues. I have stopped looking in mirrors. A chill runs through you. Not because I fear my reflection, but because I'm afraid of not seeing you over my shoulder, you swallow. They say the dead watch us through reflections. She adds, if that's true, I hope you don't mind me looking a little older. A little smaller, but still smiling when I think of you. Then she gives you something she's never offered before I forgive you. You blink. You didn't know she thought there was anything to forgive. For leaving. For not coming back. For not forcing your way through when I locked every door out of fear. You inhale slow and full. You did what I couldn't. You gave up what you wanted for what I needed. Then softer. That's what love is, isn't it? Choosing absence when presence would have caused more pain. She ends the page with a hush. There are only a few pages left, and beneath it, but I'm not done loving you yet. You fold this one slower than the rest. You want it to last, but even still pages move. Even stillness ends. There are only a few pages left, but she's still here. This page feels different. The parchment is thicker. The ink slightly raised, pressed hard as if every word cost her something. It smells faintly of lavender and fire, and at the top in her smallest handwriting, yet she's written. This one is for after. You don't know if she means after her death, after you finish reading, after grief, or perhaps after everything. She starts, "They buried me with sapphires, a line like a blade. Clean. Final. You always said jewels were loud, that they belonged in songs, not on skin. You had said that mocking some courtier's necklace that looked more like a chandelier than an accessory. I asked for none, she writes, but they dressed me like a monument. Of course they did. Because no one could imagine her without her titles, her symbols, her curated glory. I wanted to be buried in the green robe, she writes. But they chose silk from the vault, stiff, colorless, expensive. It crackles when you move me. You wince. The idea of her still dressed by strangers, her wishes muffled by ceremony, it hurts more than you expect. They painted my lips, she writes. The wrong color. A pause. I'm writing this not from spite, but so someone somewhere will know I noticed, and now you do too. She tells you of the service. They sang in a language I never understood. They quoted me incorrectly. They cried too loudly, then not at all. She paints the entire spectacle with the same dry grace she used in life. But underneath it, a quiet sadness hums. No one read my favorite poem. You frown. Which one yours? You inhale. The one about the bird who mistook a candle for the sun. You'd written that in spring on a napkin with wine-stained fingers. You didn't even think she kept it. I did, she confirms. I kept it in my breast pocket. It was there when I died. Your chest tightens. She continues. The last thing I smelled was lilac. The last thing I saw was the ceiling cracked dull familiar. But the last thing I felt was peace. A silence opens. Because I knew this letter would reach you. You let your hand rest on the page. She shifts now not to memory, not to sorrow, but to hope. They will forget me quickly. That can't be true, you think. The world always forgets women who ruled gently. They remember the blade, not the balm. The roar, not the whisper. A beat. But maybe, just maybe they'll remember me as a woman who wrote a letter instead of a speech. You will. Always. And you, she adds, will remember the other versions. The ones they never saw. She paints them briefly in soft strokes. The version who forgot state dinners to watch thunderstorms. The one who knew every constellation and named them after her own regrets. The girl who once practiced your signature just to feel closer. You blink. That last one stings in a tender, curious way. They called me powerful, she writes. But you called me kind. And it meant more than a kingdom ever could. She returns now to you. I imagine you reading this lit by a single candle. Head tilted, lip curled just slightly. The way you always looked when you were about to fall asleep but didn't want to. She knows you. Still, if I had more time, she says I'd write you a book. No politics, no battles. Just the quiet lives we never got to live. A final pause. But this letter will have to do. She ends the page with a gift. A line you once wrote forgotten by everyone except her. Some things break because they were made to be opened. Beneath it in faint ink. Thank you for opening me. You don't fold this one. You just let it rest against your chest, letting your heartbeat echo through its fibers. Only a few pages remain now, but time just for a while stands still. This page is thinner. The ink has bled slightly at the edges like water once brushed its surface tears maybe, or a shaking hand holding a wine glass too tightly. It feels like a confession wrapped in lace. Fragile but meant to endure, she opens with a memory neither of you has ever spoken of. There was a day I almost kissed you. Your breath stills. Not in the garden, not during the festival, not under stars or in the cloak of poetry. You wait. It was raining. I had just been told of a rebellion in the north. You were standing by the window, reading silently. You remember that day now. The air smelled like ash and ink. You had stayed still, sensing something was unraveling around her. You didn't speak. You just stood there, present. I wanted to lean in. She writes just an inch, to touch nothing but your breath. You remember the pause, the flicker of tension, the moment you felt warmth where none should have been. But I didn't. Of course she didn't. Too much protocol, too many watching shadows even in silence. I went to war instead. A single sentence that unspools into 1,000 futures that never happened. She continues. What I'm trying to say is my life was made of almosts, but you were the only one I ever almost chose. That line stings. Not because it hurts, but because it's honest, and because it's yours. Historians will say I chose power, a beat, but I chose safety, and safety is rarely honest. She adds, I should have kissed you. Once. Even if it ruined everything. You feel your hands tremble. She shifts tone gently. There was a musician who played outside my window every third evening. He never knew I listened. Never asked for coins, just played. For the air. For the dust. For me. You vaguely remember him, a boy with crooked fingers and a song that always sounded half-finished. I envied him. You blink. Because he gave his music freely, even knowing no one might hear it. Another beat. You were like that. You loved freely. Quietly. Without asking anything in return. You never thought of yourself that way. But she did. I watched you love everyone but yourself. You swallow. You once told me love was a fire that didn't want witnesses. You did say that. You said it as a joke during one of those long nights when philosophy spilled from your wine-glazed lips like prayer. I've burned quietly since. You close your eyes. She begins listing again not memories, but places. The corridor that smells like rosemary. The window seat that faced the bakery. The bath where I once wept into the steam. She writes all of them carry your echo. And now she begins drawing the letter to its final arc. I'm not afraid of being forgotten. A pause. I'm afraid of being misremembered. You understand the difference. Let them call me cold, she writes, but let you remember the woman who once stayed up all night sewing a cloak for a court jester who hated the cold. That was you. You hadn't known where it came from. She continues. Let them say I ruled alone, but you remember the night I braided your hair when you were too ill to move. You'd assumed it was the servant. She had dismissed everyone that evening. Let them say I died with pride. But you remember, I died with your name under my tongue. You press the page to your lips as if that could somehow complete the circle. She finishes this page differently. No flourish, no metaphor, just, if I was anything in this world, let it be your home. And beneath that, there are 2 pages left. You stare at the words. Just 2. But somehow she feels closer than ever. This page feels like dusk. The ink is darker here, deliberate, like each word was placed with the same care one might use to light a single candle in a dark cathedral. The parchment hums with softness, as if the sharpness of her reign has been replaced finally with peace. She begins not with memory, but with mercy. If you ever loved me truly, then don't chase what comes next. You pause. Don't go looking for portraits or relics or testimonies from those who claim to know me. She's asking you to stop. Not out of cruelty, but because she understands something now. Something final. You won't find me in the records, a breath. You'll find me in pauses, in quiet, in small, unremarkable things that look like nothing until you look twice. She gives examples. The echo of heels in an empty corridor. The scent of burning cedar even when there is no fire. A single wrinkled page caught in a breeze. She writes, I am not what I ruled. I am what I remembered. And then you were what I remembered most. A stillness overtakes you. She shifts now to describe her fears, not the grand ones of war or death, but the personal ones, the kind she never confessed aloud. I was afraid of being too much, then quickly, and afraid of not being enough. She admits to contradictions. You always sensed I wanted to be admired, but I hated being seen. I craved connection, but I recoiled when it came too close. You knew these patterns. You worked around them. Sat outside her walls without asking for entry. You didn't demand explanations. That's why I wrote this for you. You feel that line land like a whisper against your ribs. You never asked for the truth. So I gave it freely. She turns now to a soft moment, one you had forgotten. There was a winter when the pipes froze. I made tea over candlelight. You brought a blanket and fell asleep in the hallway. You blink. That happened. You remember the cold tiles, the flickering shadows, the sound of her singing off-key under her breath. I never told you, but I stayed awake all night. You smile faintly. I was afraid that if I slept, I'd dream you were gone. You had thought the same thing. She writes, It wasn't the palace that kept me warm that night. It was knowing you were there even in sleep. A pause. That's what you gave me. Presence without pressure. Love without demand. She drifts for a moment, speaking of things she'll never see. They say the orchard is blooming again. They say a new star has been named after me. I wish they hadn't. And then with soft humor, I don't want to be a star. I want to be a fireplace. A beat. Warm, quiet, unremarkable, necessary. You smile. It suits her far better than celestial grandeur. She turns now toward legacy. They'll say I died in control. A breath. But the truth is, I let go before the end. And here comes her real admission. I gave you my last real choice. She never had to write this. She never had to open these chambers of herself, but she did. For you. She ends this page in a hush, as if leaning close to your ear. The final page is next. Don't rush. Read it like you would a prayer not for gods, but for ghosts. You don't fold this one. You leave it open beside the flame. Because she is not quite gone. Not yet. The final page. Its parchment is soft, barely holding the ink. The corners curl inward like a closing hand. The handwriting is shakier now, and you can almost feel the pauses between lines moments, when the pen hovered unsure if it should continue. She begins without pretense. This is goodbye. No metaphors, no riddles. Just breath-meeting ink. If I could, I would stretch this letter longer than my reign. A pause, but we both know how it ends. You do. You've always known. They say queens die twice. Once in the flesh, once in memory. A beat. I lived too long preparing for the first. I forgot to protect myself from the second. You can feel it now, that quiet panic that sits just behind dignity. The fear of becoming footnotes and rumors. But she doesn't linger there. Instead, she turns her gaze to you. If you carry me, let it be gently. Let no monument bear my name unless it also bears yours. That line halts you. Not because of its weight, but because of its generosity. Because she has never shared the stage before. She continues. You asked me once what I feared most. You remember? It was late. Wine, a storm outside. She had changed the subject. I said I feared failure. I lied. A quiet breath behind her next words. What I feared most was loving someone I could never hold. You blink hard. She writes, you were never mine. Not by vow, not by blood, but by silence. And by every unwritten thing we shared. That's what made it sacred. They'll never name you in my histories. But you're in every line between the lines. She lists them like a rosary. The pause before I speak in counsel. The page I leave blank in every speech. The room I never opened to guest. You live in all of them. She turns now to her final wish. If there is a place beyond this, she doesn't define it. Doesn't pretend to know. I hope it has soft chairs and late mornings. And no need for crowns. A smile hides in the ink. I hope you're there, reading something you've already read, laughing at a line I've already heard. You can almost see her feet tucked under her, a cup in hand, listening to you speak nonsense just to fill the air. And if I'm late arriving, she adds, don't wait, just start the fire, I'll find you. She doesn't end the letter with love. That word was never big enough for what you shared. Instead, she ends with this, you made me human. And beneath it, in a different ink lighter faded, thank you for reading. There is no signature. Just a final small symbol, the daisy again drawn in soft looping lines. A callback to the margin sketch at the beginning. A full circle. You lower the letter. The room feels different now. Quieter, yes, but not emptier. As if something just arrived, not left. A presence. Or the echo of one. You sit back. Let the silence swell. And whisper aloud, I was yours. You were mine. Even now, the candle is nearly burned out, casting shadows that dance like soft ghosts across the desk. The final page has already been read, but your hands still hover over the stack, as if turning them one more time might summon her voice again. It won't, but still you linger. And in this silence you begin to feel the weight of everything she left behind. Not gold, not power, but language and love. Your gaze drifts back to that last line. You made me human. It echoes in the marrow. You think of all the ways you never said what you felt. How words so easily fell from your pen, but not from your mouth. And how somehow she understood anyway. In the flickering half-light, you let your memory trace her backwards. Not as a queen. Not as an icon. But as the girl in the green robe with sleeves like drowning birds. As the woman who practiced your signature in secret. As the voice that said, don't rush. You don't. The air in the room is heavier now, but softer, like velvet laid over a piano. every creak of wood beneath you feels like punctuation. You don't dare interrupt it. She once asked you not to come looking, not to chase what comes next. But what if you didn't have to? What if she's already here in the dust on the windowsill? In the warmth that lingers in a room too long empty? In the rhythm of your breath as it calms? She said queens die twice. But what if memory quiet, stubborn and wholly yours could resurrect her in every moment you feel understood by a shadow? You sit with that. No rush. Not tonight. You won't speak of this letter to anyone. It's not a document. It's a devotion. A conversation across time stitched in silence and threadbare paper. Too intimate for history books. Too alive to ever truly end. You reach for the candle and snuff it with careful fingers. The smoke rises, twisting upward. Somewhere within you, beside you, behind you, she exhales. Still listening. Darkness now wraps around you, soft and unthreatening. The candle is out, but the glow of her words remains burned into your mind like constellations on the inside of your eyelids. You don't need light anymore. You see her everywhere. You reach for the letter again, not to read, but to feel. The weight of it. The texture. The spaces between the pages where her breath once hovered. And something shifts in you. Not sorrow, not yet peace, but reverence. You recall her saying, "I wrote this for after." And now you understand. This was never meant to change history. It was meant to change you. You close your eyes and picture her not on a throne, but on a quiet bench in a forgotten garden. Knees drawn to her chest, one hand curled round a steaming cup, the other idly stroking the spine of an unread book. No guards, no strategy, no legacy demanding attention, just presence. She once said, "Don't stop reading." And maybe that was a metaphor too. Don't stop seeing the poetry in silence. Don't stop recognizing the letters written in glances. Don't stop holding space for someone who is no longer physically here, but hasn't quite left either. You rise slowly, letter in hand. You place it into the drawer. She gave you a small wooden box with carvings of stars and serpents and half-finished words. She once told you it was useless, that it didn't lock, that it held no value. But now it holds everything. The drawer closes with a soft click. Not an ending, just a pause. Because this story doesn't need more chapters. It only needs a reader, and you are that. You always were. She knew. You know now. And in the hush of the room, something deep within you bows. Not in grief, in gratitude. You sit back down, not because you're tired, but because you're full. The kind of full that comes after a long, slow meal where every bite is a memory, every flavor, a name you forgot you knew. This is what the letter has become. Sustenance. Not for the body, but for the places inside you that were hollowed out by time, by silence, by what was never said. She filled them not with apology, not with grandeur, but with the kind of truth that only exists in the quietest of human rooms. You hear her now, not her voice, but her cadence, in your own thoughts, in the way your breathing slows. She's rewired something in you. That's what final letters do. They are blueprints for how to go on. You walk to the window. It's still dark. Maybe it's always dark at this hour, but it doesn't feel lonely. Not anymore. She is somewhere in the space between the branches and the hush before dawn and the shimmer of something almost remembered. You wonder what her last thought was. Not her final word, not her final act, but the last flicker of consciousness before it slipped away. You hope it was something small and perfect, like a breeze on the back of her neck, Or the feeling of you brushing past her in a hallway, once not looking, not speaking, but both of you knowing. You smile. Because even queens want that wordless certainty, that echo of being loved in the way no title, no legend, no crown ever promises. You return to your desk and run a finger along the stack of pages. 32 of them. Soon to be 33. The same age she was when you met her. The same number of times she tried to say goodbye and never could. Until now. You lean forward now, fingertips brushing the edge of the final, unwritten space, the silence after story. The place where endings are no longer made of ink, but of intention. The letter is finished, and yet something in you wants to stay seated. Wants to read it all again, not to remember, but to re-feel. But you don't. You respect her too much to turn this into obsession. She asked for presence, not pilgrimage. You rise from your chair, slowly, as if carrying something fragile in your chest. And perhaps you are. You look around your room seeing it differently now. Not because it changed, but because you did. She's taught you how to look for meaning in margins. That the quietest moments are often the most sacred. You move to the mirror. And for a second, just 1 second, you think you see her standing behind you. Not fully, not clearly, but enough. Enough to remind you that love, real love, is not an echo. It's a foundation. Something built in silence, maintained in absence, and carried like a secret that softens your voice. You close your eyes. You remember the scent of lavender, the burn of ink on your fingers. The way she always left a room 5 seconds before it felt right, just to remain unforgettable. And now, standing there bathed in stillness, you whisper, "I'll carry you." Not in grief, not in legend, but in laughter, in patience, in the long pauses where one heart waits for another to catch up. And just like that, she is home. Not in the throne room, not in the archives, but in the steady rhythm of a life quietly, bravely continuing. Just as she hoped, just as she wrote. And now, breathe. Deeper than you have all night, let the story settle. Not in your mind, but in your shoulders. Let them drop. Let your jaw soften. Let your hands fall open. You've walked a long way tonight. Through memory, through longing, through pages written in silence and sealed in truth. You sat with the queen not in her palace, but in her final truest form. A woman undressed of power, wrapped in memory, holding nothing but the courage to be honest at the end. Let her voice linger just a little longer. Feel her in the hush around you, in the softest corners of your room, in the still space where a letter once was and where your heart now gently rests. You don't need to remember every word. The story is already inside you, and now you are allowed to let it fade. The world outside is slower now, the sky a deep ink wash, the air cooler, softer. Let your breath match its rhythm. No more queens, no more poets. Just you. Just stillness. And if you dream tonight, may it be of candlelight laughter under blankets, a garden with no gate, and a letter that never truly ends. Sleep well. You've earned it. End of script. Sweet dreams.